Chapter 91. The feeling of being as refreshed as star platinum pummeling the lover's stand welled up spontaneously. Uvijin, like a tattered rag doll, was sent flying by John, constantly receiving the stone freeze barrage in mid-air. The most terrifying aspect was stone freeze's ability to pull him back. Only 3 seconds had passed, but Uvijin's body had already been deformed by stone freeze attacks. But it was enough. Uvijin had already begun to regain control of his body. John's Nen was too weak, Stone Free wasn't a strong control type stand, and Ripple Walk's control was also too weak. Being able to control him for 3 seconds was already an unexpected delight. However, John didn't plan to stop there, or rather, neither side intended to cease fighting like this. Uvijin was also extremely annoyed at being punched so many times by John. If he didn't kill John, he feared he wouldn't find peace. Stone Free's hands suddenly grabbed Uvijin's hands, and then it delivered a kick to Uvijin's crotch, and that wasn't the end of it, it continued to kick him relentlessly. Uvijin had long since gathered his Nen to his crotch, so he didn't suffer much damage. Although Nen could enhance defense, it couldn't weaken the sense of pain. Stone Free's kicks were still very painful. "Ah, you bastard, I'm going to kill you. No one can save you." Uvijin glared fiercely at John, all previous appreciation and excitement gone. A tangible killing intent emanated from him, with only one conviction: to kill John. But John remained indifferent. In truth, since Uvijin's birth, no one had ever brought him so much humiliation. Previous opponents had either been killed by him or subdued him, like Krollo. No one had ever shamed him like this. Nobunaga, who was dozens of meters away and wanted to help, hesitated. Uvijin was now completely consumed by anger, unrecognizable. If Nobunaga intervened, he might also be attacked. Looks like things are getting dangerous. When was the last time Uvijin got so angry? Nobunaga reminisced briefly, remembering that the last time Uvijin got so angry, everything around him was shattered into pieces by the enraged Uvijin. Thinking of this, Nobunaga swallowed hard. No one wanted to encounter Uvijin when he was enraged and had lost his mind. It was a nightmare. John indeed sensed Uvijin's change. Seeing that something was wrong, John didn't give Uvijin any chance to show off. What about magical girls or Kamen riders in TV shows? As long as you don't give them time to transform, won't that solve the problem? John's main body directly delivered a punch. But this was just a feint. The real killing move was hidden in John's sleeve, Grey Fly. This was an insect-type stand, very small in size, so its power was only E. It was the first cannon fodder stand to appear, but its speed was first class. Grey Fly's speed on the stats was A, far exceeding that of a bullet. If it was an ordinary person's skull, Grey Fly could barely shatter it, but Uvijin's Nen-covered skull was definitely impossible. Therefore, Grey Fly's target wasn't the hard forehead but the fragile eyeball. No matter how Nen defended, the eyes were still very fragile organs. A grey-black beetle rapidly shot out of John's sleeve, and even Uvijin could only see a black afterimage. Then, Uvijin's eyes suffered a tragic fate. A grey-black beetle was drilling into Uvijin's left eye, and blood flowed non-stop. "Ah, you little beast!" Uvijin was already exasperated. Intense pain swept through Uvijin's body. Uvijin's brother had been mercilessly pummeled so many times by Stone Free, and it was unknown if it would still be usable in the future. Now, his eye had also been blinded by John. This might be the biggest injury Uvijin had ever suffered. Uvijin's hatred for John had long since become irreconcilable. Uvijin's eyelid clamped down on Grey Fly. John shook his head. Muta 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 muta. John silently opened the system and replaced Grey Fly's card. The insect-type stand on Uvijin's eyelid also disappeared. Stone Free continued to kick Uvijin's abdomen. After hearing Uvijin's screams, Nobunaga also realized that Uvijin might really be in trouble. He didn't care whether Uvijin would complain afterward and directly rushed up to kill John and rescue Uvijin. Faced with the threat to life, Nobunaga wouldn't care about who was whose prey. As Uvijin's close friend, he just didn't want Uvijin to die, nothing more. This distance of dozens of meters was only a moment for Nobunaga. Before Nobunaga arrived, Stone Free had no way to kill Uvijin in such a short time. Nobunaga had already arrived beside John, gripping the hilt of his sword with both hands. A sharp and pure killing intent swept over him, different from Uvijin's violent killing intent. Nobunaga's killing intent was very pure, as if staring at someone destined to die. Nobunaga's arrogance was even greater than Uvijin's, it was just that ordinary people couldn't see it. Nobunaga swung his sword, attacking not the ability user, John, but Stone Free, who was actually beating Yuvajin. Nobunaga also had his own considerations. There were some nin abilities in the world that could continue to execute even after their user died. Nobunaga didn't dare to gamble, it was safer to attack John first. Stone Free was a humanoid stand composed of thread, with strong resistance to blunt force, but it couldn't block the attacks of sharp weapons. A swordsman like Nobunaga could be said to be Stone Free's nemesis. In front of him, Stone Free could only exert at most 30% of its strength. It could be said to be extremely disadvantageous. But John had foreseen Nobunaga's participation in the battle. John had considered this situation from the very beginning of the battle. Therefore, John had been guarding against the watching Nobunaga while fighting Yuvajin. Because their relationship was very good, if one of them encountered a life-threatening danger, the other would definitely step in. So John had been laying an ambush all along. Nobunaga and Yuvajin were different. Although they were both top combatants in the Phantom Troop and the best partners, their fighting styles were completely different. Yuvajin relied on his powerful physical advantages, coupled with nin pressure far exceeding ordinary people, to suppress his opponents, but Nobunaga relied on his superhuman speed and his powerful control over the sword. Nobunaga perfectly combined swordsmanship and nin. Nobunaga could create an invincible aerial zone of nearly 2 meters. Nobunaga could cut off everything that approached this zone. Nobunaga's sword speed was very terrifying. Even Phaeton, the fastest in the troop, couldn't take advantage. In fact, Nobunaga was even better in terms of attack speed, but his movement speed was not as good as Phaeton's. This was why he had been able to hold out for so long under John's silver chariot. Ding 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 ding, the crisp sound of swords clashing and the dull sound of Stone Free hitting flesh echoed each other. Nobunaga wasn't nervous at all. This was confidence in his own strength. Nobunaga's strength exceeded Silver Chariot's, as was the length of his blade. Yuvajin had also regained consciousness and was preparing to counterattack. Yuvajin's strength had been greatly reduced due to John's attacks, but he still couldn't relax his vigilance. Yuvajin took advantage of John's all-out effort to deal with Nobunaga to jump away a distance. At the same time, a considerable number of people had gathered at the entrance of the mausoleum. They were either standing on the trees or sitting on the ground, watching the battle in front of them with interest. "Hey, leader, haven't Yuvajin and the others been gone for too long?" A fair-skinned woman with a high nose bridge said expressionlessly. A handsome young man in a black coat closed his book. "If it's those two, they should be fine." In front of the handsome young man was a very bloody scene. A middle-aged man was weakly lying in a pool of blood, his hands and feet had all been cut off, really turning him into a human stick, but strangely, not a drop of blood flowed from the wounds. His face was full of fear and collapse. If John came, he would definitely be surprised that this middle-aged man was the majestic middle-aged man beside the old man that John had always thought was a master. Speaking of which, Phaeton hasn't solved his opponent either. I didn't expect so many experts to gather here. Yuvajin and the others must have encountered some tricky people too. A blonde youth, Shulnark, who was playing on a computer, replied with a lollipop in his mouth. "But I always feel like there's a problem," a petite woman with pink hair expressed her concerns. "Then let's go take a look." A towering figure of about 2 meters walked out of the darkness, with a very large scar on his face and very large earlobes, looking particularly terrifying, enough to stop children from crying. Ikuyo. Chapter 92. Yuvajin jumped out 3 or 4 meters, which wasn't very far, but it was enough to get out of Stone Free's firing range. However, Stone Free's panel range is just a load of crap. Stone Free can easily perform the stretch punch. John decisively had Stone Free launch a stretch punch directly at Yuvajin's face, not caring about anything else. But the distance was too great to deliver an aura barrage, both speed and power were somewhat lacking. Yuvajin wasn't stupid, he had already suffered enough from the earlier aura punches. "Damn it, Nobunaga, why are you stealing my prey? I'm definitely going to kill him," Yuvajin said through gritted teeth. Hi, Wakata, I understand, but I can't help it." Nobunaga knew Yuvajin's awkward personality, although grateful for Nobunaga's rescue, he still stubbornly expressed his displeasure. As expected, Yuvajin is such a tsundere. Nobunaga was completely entangled by Silver Chariot, barely able to spare a bit of energy to talk to Yuvajin. Dealing with a speed-type opponent like Silver Chariot required absolute focus, even a millisecond of relaxation could instantly end the battle. A crisp ting, 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 ting sound rang out. Unlike the intense wind pressure from the fight with Yuvajin, the battle with Nobunaga had no aftershocks. It lacked in spectacle, but the danger level was not reduced in the slightest. Yuvajin raised his foot, preparing to go and provide support, having already paid the price for his carelessness. Leave him to me, you go and watch out for that disappearing brat. Yuvajin prepared to charge in and attack John. Nobunaga tacitly jumped back a distance, giving Yuvajin room to maneuver. In fact, Yuvajin's true combat power was superior to John's, but he was inexplicably drawn into John's rhythm, led around by the nose. But Yuvajin intended to use a strong offensive to bring John into his own rhythm. In terms of strength, Yuvajin was still better than John, and with Yuvajin's terrifying amount of Nen, he could exhaust John to death. Yuvajin always believed that stands were entirely driven by Nen abilities. What's going on? Yuvajin felt something pulling at his leg, as if his foot was glued in place. That's right, John had used Crazy Diamond to bring out the Great Tower. Now, the Great Tower was basically useless. It was okay against Yuvajin, but its destructive power was too low, only capable of surprise attacks. If they knew in advance, it would be impossible to cause any damage to Yuvajin. Nobunaga's sword speed was extremely fast. John predicted that if he released the Great Tower, there was an 80% chance it would be taken down by Nobunaga. The Great Tower's defense was very low. Once it was hit, it would definitely be cut in half. According to the principle that damage to the stand is reflected on the user, if the Great Tower was cut, John wouldn't survive either. So, after the failed sneak attack, John decisively switched out the Great Tower. Just now, John had painstakingly restrained the urge to use Crazy Diamond. John wanted to simultaneously restrict the actions of Yuvajin and Nobunaga, but he didn't want them to be too close. It would be more difficult to kill them if they were too close and able to support each other. Now, the situation was that Yuvajin couldn't reach Nobunaga, and Nobunaga couldn't reach Yuvajin. John breathed a sigh of relief. John had relied on Epitaph's predictions and his control of the battle to create such a favorable environment. But John didn't feel any joy, his aura didn't change at all. Perhaps it was because he practiced Ripple too much, he was no longer happy or sad about battles. Of course, the main reason was that he hadn't completely won yet. This was the Hunter world, anything could happen with sudden reversals. Just half a minute ago, Yuvajin had ambushed John with the emission-type Nen bullet, and John was at a disadvantage. Only half a minute later, everything had changed. John had not only successfully reversed the situation but also trapped Nobunaga. In movies, villains often gain a great advantage, possessing powerful strength, but each time, the protagonist relies on some opportunity, taking advantage of the villain's arrogance when victory is near to achieve a desperate comeback. There are very few such villains in the Hunter world. Under normal circumstances, villains won't give you a chance to chat, they'll directly kill their opponents. They are more willing to stand on their opponent's corpse, laughing heartily or dancing. John was the same. John also adhered to the principle of never becoming complacent before his opponent breathed their last. What single combat, what face-to-face duels. John would never have such dirty and boring thoughts, like rat droppings in a toilet. John had never received an education in chivalry. As long as he could kill his opponent without harming innocents, John didn't shy away from any means, such as poisoning or assassination. Achieve victory, and then control everything. This was what John was pursuing. John wouldn't give Yuvajin and Nobunaga a chance to react, wouldn't let them guess the essence of his ability, wouldn't wait for them to come up with countermeasures. Whether it was Yuvajin or Nobunaga, getting close to them was very dangerous. John's Crazy Diamond had fixed Yuvajin and Nobunaga's feet to the ground. But their hands could still move, whether it was Yuvajin's fist or Nobunaga's slash. John didn't dare to take them head-on. Nobunaga was also very uncomfortable. John's Nen was very immature, and the amount was very small, but he didn't expect to kick a steel plate. Which Nen user has as many endless abilities as John? If he had known, he would have prepared a heavy sniper rifle. Now, John didn't dare to get too close to Yuvajin and Nobunaga. Hey, 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 your fist is glowing, what are you hiding? Do you think I'm stupid, Yuvajin? If I go over, I'll be hammered into mincemeat, right? Unfortunately, Emperor and Sex Pistol's destructive power was insufficient. Only an A-level destructive power could cause effective damage to a tank-type player like Yuvajin. Perhaps only armor-piercing bullets would work. Wait, bullets, John thought of something. The power of ordinary bullets was not enough to penetrate Yuvajin's defense, but I can add a buff to the bullets. Crazy Diamond's attack power was also very strong. Crazy Diamond could easily increase the power of the bullets. John didn't have a gun on him, but fortunately, he still had a few throwing knives. He immediately took out the remaining throwing knife and fixed it in the air with Crazy Diamond. King Crimson, erase time from now on. The surrounding environment turned grey again. Yuvajin and Nobunaga didn't move, poised to strike at any moment to kill John if he approached them. During the skipped time, he used Stone Free and King Crimson to frantically output power to the handle of the throwing knife. Using King Crimson to erase time was to prevent Yuvajin and Nobunaga from interfering with the acceleration process. This wasn't like the bullet fired with just a finger tap in the original work. This bullet was simultaneously enchanted with Stone Free and King Crimson, both with a level destructive power. The kinetic energy attached to the throwing knife now was terrifyingly large, it could even penetrate a tank. When the 5 seconds of time erase ended, the throwing knife was launched, and no one could stop it. Rai, shine, Yuvajin. Everything around returned to color. Friendly reminder, the website is about to be revised, which may cause the loss of reading progress. Please save bookshelf and reading records in time, it is recommended to save screenshots. We apologize for the inconvenience. Chapter 93. The faint morning light streamed into the room through the light blue curtains. The curtains softened the light, casting a gentle blue hue instead of a harsh glare. The room wasn't large, but the light filtering through the window illuminated it perfectly. The wooden floor had aged to a light brown color. A boy, around 12 or 13 years old, sat motionless on the bed, his expression blank, almost idiotic. He was Liu Yiguang, a young man from Hua country. He had just graduated from university, having spent 4 years at a third-rate college to get a diploma. There were plenty of college students like him, and it would be difficult to find a job with this worthless piece of paper. He and his roommate had been working on a game, which not only didn't make any money but also lost them some. After drinking a bit of alcohol, he passed out and woke up here. Fortunately, he had a younger brother, so his parents' support shouldn't be a problem. The boy's bed wasn't far from the mirror. Sitting on the bed, he could clearly see his reflection. 5 minutes ago, he had assimilated the memories of this body. His name was John Belosevic, male, 12 years old, with black hair and black eyes, 1.65 m tall, decent looking, healthy with no bad habits. He wasn't an orphan, his parents were alive, but he had no house, no car, no younger sister, and no star-shaped birthmark on his neck. No broken engagements, no fits of anger, no magic. This seemed like a safe world. John, come down for breakfast. The boy retracted his gaze, got up, quickly straightened his clothes, and hurried downstairs. His father was a member of some gang, but John wasn't sure of the specifics. Perhaps it was deliberately concealed, as John knew very little about him. In John's memories, he had only seen him once. John picked up the mouthwash and went into the bathroom, unscrewed the lid, poured 2 mouthfuls of mouthwash, grabbed the wet towel on the side, and wiped his face a few times before turning to eat. Hey, John, is something wrong? You seem strange today. The housekeeper aunt looked at John with a suspicious expression. John's face stiffened, then he revealed a warm smile. Nothing's wrong, I just didn't sleep well last night. By the way, are we having apple pie today? Of course, hurry and wash your hands. The housekeeper aunt's attention was instantly diverted. Hey, we've had apple pie for 2 days now. He breathed a sigh of relief in his heart, secretly thinking, thank goodness I was quick-witted, I almost got found out on the spot. To be discovered less than an hour after transmigrating would truly be a disgrace to transmigrators. Although he inherited the memories of the original owner, some habits were still difficult to change. John, I'm going out now. The housekeeper aunt picked up a small basket and prepared to leave. Also, there's ice cream in the refrigerator, but don't eat too much. John rolled his eyes. I'm not a child anymore. John breathed a sigh of relief when he saw the aunt leaving. John ate a few mouthfuls at random and went upstairs. Because it was summer vacation, the 12-year-old John had time to understand the world. From the memories, this world was definitely not Earth. None of the countries on the world map were ones he had heard of in his previous life. And those strange continental shelves, Earth couldn't produce them even in another 100 million years. After all, little John was still young and his understanding of the world was immature. He couldn't determine which world he was in from his memories. John turned on the computer to search for information. This old computer belonged to the housekeeper couple's son and was quite old. Based on the principle of making use of waste, they gave it to John. The server took more than a minute to load. Looking at the recommended and pinned posts, he quickly typed a few words and clicked. Looking at the answers given by the search engine, John was directly stunned. Whale Island, surrounded by sea on all sides, the residents are mainly engaged in fishing, the scenery is beautiful, and there are many rare animals. Whale Island is the birthplace of Gone Freaks, the protagonist of Hunter x Hunter. Combining that with the fact that the occupations of the wealthy on the rich list he had just seen were inexplicably filled with the title of professional hunter, John was finally convinced that this was the world of Hunter x Hunter. This world could be considered a mid-level martial world, with an extremely high level of danger. What a safe world, my ass! I thought it was a slice of life world, but I didn't expect it to be the hunter world. John lay back on the bed, recalling the bits and pieces of his previous life. A fear of not being able to return home and a fear of his life being out of control intertwined. He recalled his homeland in his previous life. Although he was a wage slave, at least there was a government to stand up for you, and you wouldn't be killed at the drop of a hat. In this world, if you were casually killed by the Phantom Troop, who would you cry to? Suddenly startled, John remembered the novels he had read on Gideon in his previous life. Under normal circumstances, the protagonist of a transmigration would have a golden finger. He silently recited, "Old Grandpa, System Kun, Main God, if you're there, give me a shout. System is activating." A heavenly electronic voice came from within his mind. Even the outside the window. What? A system. I really am the chosen one. God really does still love me. John suddenly became ecstatic. This definitely wasn't a dream. Thinking that he could also start on the path of boasting and slaughtering, just like other protagonists, and reach the pinnacle of the world. No, as the king of the world, how could he not have a harem of wives and concubines? The golden finger has arrived, next is boasting time. Thinking of this, his smile gradually became perverted. Detecting the energy system of this world, assimilating. Jojo's bizarre adventure is starting. When John saw this name, he fell into silence. This familiar interface, this familiar feeling, this seems to be the crappy game that he and his roommate made to ride the wave of golden wind. It had most of the stands and items from Jojo Parts 1-7. Because everyone was a Jojo fan, they made it very carefully, which led to an imperfect store system, so the game was a money-losing product. This game was similar to NetEase's games, you can wail all you want, but you'll still get beaten into a little brother. System, are you there? John tentatively asked. The system didn't respond. John understood in his heart that this system wasn't very intelligent. He had heard that some people even had romances with System Ace, and he was a little envious. But John was still quite fortunate, at least the system wouldn't kill him at the drop of a hat, and there was no system sprite constantly making random noises. Seeing that the system hadn't responded for a long time, John skillfully clicked on the newbie gift pack. Still the familiar recipe, still the familiar taste. Inside were 3 covered cards. 1 item card, 1 ability card, and 1 stand card. Flipping the stand card guaranteed a stand, but what you got completely depended on luck. Depends on luck. Chapter 94. Most enhancement type NAN users are simple-minded fools, and Yovajan is no exception. Frankly, as a friend, Yovajan is top-notch, he'd definitely be a true bro. However, John's values clash with his, making it impossible for them to be friends. Such a murderer is better off dead. But he comes from Meteor City, devoid of pity or kindness. He's killed so many people that he himself can't remember, and he caused a great massacre in the Kurta clan extermination. Yovajan is by no means a good person. John, who doesn't use talk no jutsu, never thought about or had the possibility of reforming him and making him turn back. Therefore, Yovajan doesn't need to be forgiven, and John won't have any compassion for him. The surrounding environment suddenly changed, time erasure was over. But Yovajan had already reacted, immediately raising his hand to prepare to block. Almost at the same time as time erasure ended, John released the fixation on the knife. Because of the terrifying force added to it, the knife shot out in an instant. Ordinary people couldn't even see the blade's light. Even Stone Free, with her superhuman dynamic vision, could only see a faint afterimage. Moreover, it was in the dark night. Nobunaga and Yovajan couldn't see the knife's trajectory, but their intuition immediately sensed the knife's disappearance. Yuvajin had already put his arm in front of his head, using KO without hesitation. There was no reason, just intuition. But the next scene was beyond Yuvajin and Nobunaga's expectations. The nin on this knife must be wrong, being hit would definitely have some special effect. This was Yuvajin's thought process. After all, the nin on this knife didn't seem like it could break his defense. But the reality was unexpected. The knife broke through Yuvajin's defense the moment it touched his arm, as if it were tearing through a layer of tofu without any resistance. This was Yuvajin's arm using KO, even armor-piercing bullets might not be able to penetrate it. The knife easily pierced through like it was piercing paper. After penetrating Yuvajin's arm, although the speed had decreased a lot, it still pierced towards Yuvajin's forehead with inertia. Yuvajin's nin, originally on his hand, quickly surged towards his forehead. The speed was fast, but after all, the time was too short, and the nin for defense was still not enough. The flying knife once again pierced into Yuvajin's forehead like a hot knife through butter. However, the nin arrived in time, and the flying knife had stopped, but the entire knife, except for the handle, had already sunk into Yuvajin's forehead. Yuvajin fell with an angry and puzzled expression, his nin was collapsing, and it wouldn't be long before it completely disappeared. Yuvajin! Nobunaga roared in disbelief, unable to believe that Yuvajin, his partner for so many years, had died just like that. Nobunaga's usually calm and profound nin became manic due to strong emotional fluctuations, becoming more aggressive, but this was a good thing for John. Nobunaga's strength lies in calmly killing enemies with high speed, watertight swordsmanship. Now, his mentality has gone wrong. Although his speed and strength may have become stronger, loopholes will appear in his swordsmanship, which is fatal for Silver Chariot, whose speed is close to the speed of light. I'm going to kill you, Nobunaga said through gritted teeth. Then let's see, John said, not wanting to exchange trash talk with Nobunaga. It was meaningless. Now, John only wanted to kill Nobunaga before the other members of the Phantom Troop arrived. Muta 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 muta. Silver Chariot frantically stabbed, but the advantage was minimal. Nobunaga's increase due to anger was too great. But John wasn't in a hurry, because Epitaph predicted that Nobunaga would make a fatal mistake in the next few seconds. John waited patiently for the opportunity to arrive. Epitaph's prediction is absolutely certain to happen unless time erasure is used, otherwise fate cannot be changed. It seemed that John was being pushed back step by step, but because of the fixed nature of craft work, Nobunaga could never get close. In fact, the current Nobunaga posed very little danger to John. If Nobunaga calmed down and used his swordsmanship to resist John, John would definitely retreat immediately. The longer the time, the greater the variables, and if the troop came to reinforce, it would be over. The technique used to kill Yuvajin just now was not very suitable for Nobunaga. Nobunaga had a high probability of changing the flying knife's trajectory with his skills. This move was also very time-consuming, time erasure was not time stop after all, and the risk was too great. This move also has many limitations. First, it cannot be interfered with when adding force to an object. If the direction of a force is added incorrectly, the attack trajectory of this move will deviate. Second, it cannot kill a speed-type opponent with one blow, such as dealing with Nobunaga. He can cut John's flying knife, which will also change the knife's attack trajectory. The knife that originally attacked the heart might hit the left arm. Finally, it takes a long time to make this move unstoppable for the opponent. Therefore, a frontal attack is the fastest and most effective. John was pushed back by Nobunaga for a while, and then immediately took a step forward and continued to attack. The so-called "the enemy advances, I retreat, the enemy is tired, I harass," not giving Nobunaga a chance to breathe. Sure enough, a flaw appeared in the 5th second. It can only be said that it was a flaw for John. Silver Chariot used a rapier to deflect Nobunaga's sword from its original trajectory. Silver Chariot took the opportunity to stab at Nobunaga, but Silver Chariot's rapier was not as long as Nobunaga's katana. This was also within Nobunaga's calculations. Nobunaga's blade turned and immediately slashed towards Silver Chariot's head. This was the solution Nobunaga came up with. But Silver Chariot also has special abilities, although they are not very obvious usually. Silver Chariot can extend its blade for attack, which is also Silver Chariot's only ultimate move before Requiem mode. The speed at which Silver Chariot's blade extends is also close to the speed of light, so Nobunaga cannot be faster than Silver Chariot. Silver Chariot's extended blade pierced into Nobunaga's chest. Silver Chariot's destructive power was still too low, and it failed to pierce through Nobunaga's chest, because Nobunaga's flowing blade deviated a little and did not hit the heart but hit the lung. Nobunaga immediately spat out blood, and Nobunaga's sword was weakened a little due to the injury, and was caught by Stone Free with her hands clasped together. This is the legendary catching a white blade with bare hands, also known as taking a sword without a sword. Next, just stab a few more times and it will be over. But an accident happened suddenly. John saw his death in epitaph. A body with countless bullet-like holes, covered in scars, looking very miserable. John was shocked when he saw this, and without saying a word, he directly erased his next time, not giving Nobunaga a chance to cut the weeds and eliminate the roots. A blanket of bullets immediately covered the area where John was located. Chapter 95. Time rewinds to 10 seconds earlier. Worried Maki and the ferocious Softa Franklin decide to check out what Yuvajin and Nobunaga are up to, and what kind of enemy is taking them so long. The others are too lazy to go. Yuvajin and Nobunaga are top-tier fighters in the group. Even if they were to face Silva Zaldek and Zeno Zaldek at the same time, they would still have a 50-50 chance. As long as they don't directly confront Badabai Giganti of the Zodiac 12, the Hunter Chairman, or Maha Zaldek, the great-grandfather of the assassin family, they are basically unlikely to die. So they are only interested in who is keeping Yuvajin and Nobunaga occupied for so long, without considering the possibility of Yuvajin being killed. You have to know that for the sake of this operation's stability, the leader specifically arranged for 2 people to act as a group. So no one followed, only Maki and Franklin. They aren't moving very fast either. Although they know it's in the north, this forest area is large, and it will take some time to find them. But then, a terrifying aura of Nen appeared. It's Nobunaga's. Maki is very surprised. Nobunaga's Nen had always been as still as a mountain and as swift as lightning. Maki had never seen such emotionally charged Nen before. Yuvajin. This is Nobunaga's voice. Why is he calling Yuvajin? Could it be that Yuvajin has been killed? Only that can explain Nobunaga's emotional breakdown. But it's hard to accept. How strong would someone have to be to break through Yuvajin's defense? Maki and Franklin are very clear on this. Killing Yuvajin in front of Nobunaga is an incredibly difficult feat. Maki desperately tries to dispel this unrealistic thought from her mind and runs quickly towards the source of the sound. Next, they see Nobunaga fighting John. Franklin immediately opens fire on John in a frenzy. But a miraculous scene appears. Silver Chariot disappears, but John doesn't dodge or avoid, and the bullets pass through John's body without causing any damage. No bulletin Naga. Maki also throws out her needles, but without exception, they all fail to harm John. Is his ability to nullify Nen attacks? Franklin guesses John's ability. No, it's not just Nen attacks. One of my needles was a physical object, not condensed from Nen, but it still didn't hurt him. Maki adds from the side. John stares intently at the suddenly appearing Maki and Franklin and sighs. It seems he won't be able to kill Nobunaga. Be careful, getting close to him will get you fixed in place. Hearing this, Franklin and Maki also stop providing remote support to Nobunaga. John dodges the attacks, and some bullets are directly caught by Stone Free with his hands. The ability that prevented us from attacking you just now has a time limit, right? It's probably only a few seconds. Maki suddenly says. John is startled. He didn't expect them to figure out part of John's ability so quickly. If this continues, it won't do. It seems he can't stay here for long and needs to prepare to retreat. And one more thing, when you maintain that state where no one can attack you, you can't use your Nen beasts to attack, right? If it weren't for that, Nobunaga would probably be dead already. Crap, what to do? They've figured out so much about me just from watching for a while. This place is indeed not suitable for a long stay. Maki and Franklin's running speed exceeds John's. They want to seek help, and John can't stop them. After all, they specialize in ranged attacks, and John has no way to deal with area of effect attacks. Moreover, Maki's Nen needles and threads are very thin and can only be seen with Gyo. If he doesn't see them, he's screwed. It's too dangerous. Who knows if there are other troop members following behind? If too many come, John might not even have a chance to escape. So now, he immediately makes a strategic retreat, having already killed one troop member. This achievement is enough. John retreats while approaching the throwing knives he threw at the beginning of the fight. He uses the mirror surface of the throwing knives to escape into the mirror world. Then, in the eyes of the three, he once again performs the disappearing act, making himself vanish. The handyman's work that was fixing Nobunaga's feet is also released. It seems John has really left, but Maki and Franklin are still on guard around the area. No need, I'll do it myself. Nobunaga glares fiercely at Franklin and turns to continue running in the direction of the leader. At the same time, John has just entered the mirror world, but as soon as he enters, a cool breeze strikes. John doesn't turn around. Stone free. Stone free emerges from John's back. He grabs the attacker's arm and throws the attacker to the ground with an over-the-shoulder throw. Ouch, that hurts. The attacker cries out. John sighs and turns around. So, Lindsay? You should look carefully at your opponent when fighting. John has a headache. Although he knocked Lindsay unconscious beforehand, he didn't expect Lindsay to wake up so quickly. Using a hand chop to make someone unconscious is a technical skill. Too much force will kill them, and too little force is useless. So, how do those people in novels control the time it takes for someone to be unconscious? John can't learn it at all. No, it's already a disaster. Damn it, John, you still have the nerve to say that? What's the deal with you leaving me here alone? You appeared suddenly, so of course I thought you were the enemy. Lindsay looks at John with a questioning face. I'm sorry, I shouldn't have abandoned you. I understand, John. Those two guys were very strong, right? Do you think I'm too weak to help? Lindsay suddenly asks John in a Tsunderam manner. She's too close, I can feel Lindsay's breath, this damn sweetness. No, John looks at John's suspicious eyes and sighs. Okay, I do think you would die facing those two guys. Hey, I'm also an Esper with superpowers like you. Don't underestimate me. As he speaks, he rolls up his sleeves, showing off his very pathetic little biceps. John rolls his eyes, but speaking of which, his skin is very good, fair, and translucent. No, this is a man, what am I thinking? John throws the miscellaneous thoughts in his brain out. I already said this is an ability, there are too many slots to start spitting from. Chapter 96. Maki looked at Nobunaga with a complex expression. She was one of the earliest friends of Uvajin and Nobunaga. She felt sad at the passing of her friend, but it was only a little bit of resentment. But she was even more worried about Nobunaga's emotions. If he knew that Uvajin was beyond saving, he would definitely be very sad. Franklin was also a meticulous person who wouldn't say superfluous words, and remained silent along the way. Although Uvajin's brain was hit, Uvajin's heart hadn't stopped beating, which gave Nobunaga a glimmer of hope. But whether it was him or others, they all understood that this hope was very slim. After about 3 minutes of rushing at their limit, Nobunaga and the others finally arrived at the meeting point of the troop. Leader. From dozens of meters away, Nobunaga seemed to see a savior. Hey? The leader turned his head in confusion and saw Nobunaga rushing over in a hurry, but when he saw Uvajin, who was barely breathing, on Nobunaga's back, the leader roughly understood what was going on. The knife on Uvajin's forehead hadn't been pulled out yet, and blood slowly flowed down from the wound on his forehead. Nobunaga, come over slowly, don't put Uvajin on the ground right away, slowly, be careful. The leader immediately instructed Nobunaga to put Uvajin on the ground. Everyone else was surprised. A freak as strong as Uvajin had fallen so inexplicably today. Hey, who exactly injured Uvajin like this? Where is that guy? A man dressed as an Egyptian pharaoh asked Nobunaga. Now is not the time to talk about this. Don't crowd around, Maki, come and give me a hand, everyone else step back a little, guard the surroundings and don't let anyone interfere with the surgery. As soon as Nobunaga settled Uvajin down, Kurora immediately rushed up, bent down to observe the situation, and gave instructions. Shizuku, go and tell Fiten to finish off his opponent quickly. I have a bad feeling. That bastard, we didn't catch him, he ran away. Nobunaga said with grief and indignation. Everyone looked at the embarrassed Nobunaga in surprise, and then looked at Maki and Franklin for confirmation. Franklin silently nodded to confirm Nobunaga's statement. Really? What kind of monster injured Uvajin like this? The three of you together couldn't kill him. Shulnark couldn't wait to ask. As the team's strategist, he was very concerned about the variables in this operation. He looks like a kid, and his nin ability doesn't seem to be very proficient, but his nin beasts are very terrifying. One is blue, with very strong power and speed, and the other is a silver nin beast that uses a sword, with even more terrifying speed, but not strong power. There are also some strange abilities. As an nin user, he is very strange. It seems that these nin beasts consume very little nin. He has been maintaining a high-intensity battle. He has a lot of abilities, which is very abnormal. He can become immune to attacks in a short period of time erase, he can stick people to the ground, handicraft, and he also has a very powerful move that left Uvajin like this even after using hardening, but there should be a limitation, he only used it once and didn't use it on me. I only found one weakness, the injuries his nin beasts suffer will also be reflected on himself. There's also a kid whose ability is also very special. He can disappear instantly, and it's been confirmed that it's not invisibility. Nobunaga told the troop about John's information. Nobunaga happily attributed the Mirror Man's ability to Lindsay. Because John wasn't dead, and judging from John's determination to kill Uvajin, John was very likely to come back to kill again, so Nobunaga told his teammates to be prepared. At this time, the leader had already pulled out the knife on Uvajin's forehead, but Uvajin was still sleeping soundly. Kuroa retracted the skill hunter and slowly stood up. Just now, he used the ability he had recorded before to perform surgery on Uvajin. The knife has been pulled out, but Uvajin doesn't know if he can wake up. This knife has already attacked the brain. Fortunately, it didn't directly attack the brain, it just hit the gap between the left and right brains, but because you brought him here, the knife still scraped against the brain, and now the situation is unknown. What exactly is going on, leader? I don't understand these things, but isn't Uvajin still alive? Theoretically, as long as the cerebellum is still there, he can breathe, but Uvajin may become a vegetable. But there is still hope, right? There must be nin users like that in the world. There definitely will be. The others comforted him. Next, I'll leave it to you to take care of Uvajin, You don't have to say it, I'll do it. Nobunaga's eyes were full of determination. Alright, there's no time, now we'll kill that old man right away. Kuroa spoke again. He turned around and killed the middle-aged man with crippled limbs with a chop to the neck. He cursed in a language that no one could understand, this was the dialect of Meteor City. Phaeton likes to curse in the dialect of Meteor City when he is angry. A broken-spined dog dares to bark. The foul-mouthed old man provoked the irritable Phaeton online. Phaeton really couldn't hold back and immediately attacked. The old man already knew that he was bound to die, those young men didn't look like good people. The old man with the determination to die was very free and happy. Wouldn't it be great to kill one more person in the last leg of his life? Looking at the current situation, Phaeton has the upper hand, but Phaeton is covered in knife wounds, while the old man has no injuries at all. In the eyes of those who know the ropes, the difference is obvious. The old man's fighting style is more like Nobunaga's, but he is more experienced, just an enhanced version of Nobunaga, except that his attack range is not as long as Nobunaga's. But he is definitely a more terrifying player than Nobunaga. But the old man himself knew that he didn't have much advantage in this battle. There is a saying that fighting is afraid of the young and strong, which also applies here. The old man's fighting experience and swordsmanship are superior to Phaeton's, but after all, he is old. As an enhancer, he can burst out for a short time, but he can't handle a long battle. In fact, the old man was already at the end of his rope, and it was himself who was struggling to survive, but he hit it very well, no one noticed. Phaeton had some awareness but he didn't think about it carefully. If he were 20 years younger, he would have the confidence to kill Phaeton in 15 minutes, but he is too old now, whether it is an ability or physical strength, the difference is too great. I, Zhao Liang, 105 years old, married. I started learning swords at the age of 4 and have been doing it for 101 years. I am a peerless genius who is rare in a century, I love short swords, I learned dozens of weapons at the age of 16, and I went to kick gyms and seek enemies everywhere at the age of 18. At the age of 36, I thought I was invincible in the world. At the age of 38, I met Netero of the Shinjin Ry, and I lost my arms to the 100-type Guanyin, and I have failed again for decades. Today, I will die outside Yorbian East. Kuroa led the troop and walked over, the cracking sound of breaking branches was like the footsteps of the Grim Reaper. Behind. The sound came from the rear of the troop, and a figure flashed by. When the troop turned around, John disappeared again. Several throwing knives attached with nen flew over. Kurora casually swatted away these throwing knives with worrying accuracy, but Kurora didn't relax and was still frowning. Chapter 97. No one knows how John appeared. The first to notice was Nobunaga, who was guarding next to Uvajin. Because John appeared closer to Nobunaga, Nobunaga was the first to notice John's appearance. However, Nobunaga did not attack John, but ran in front of Uvajin and stood firmly in front of him. Nobunaga didn't know what other strange abilities John had. He suspected that John had come specifically to collect Uvajin's life after discovering that Uvajin was not completely dead. Nobunaga wasn't too worried about the others. The others were all together, and it wouldn't be easy for John to kill the other members of the Phantom Troop. Kurolo didn't understand what John was trying to do. He had just confirmed that those throwing knives had nothing special about them. As a means of sneak attack, it might work against ordinary people without combat experience, but against the Phantom Troop, it was as fragile as a child's toy. If he hadn't almost killed Uvajin and forced Nobunaga into such a desperate situation, he might have really believed that John was a weakling. Moreover, as an experienced veteran, Kurolo clearly discerned that there wasn't even any residual poison on these throwing knives. John also didn't seem like someone who had practiced throwing knives. If he wanted to kill someone with throwing knives, then John would definitely have some skills, but judging from his previous level, John was completely a novice. However, Kurolo couldn't think so much anymore. The most important thing now was to prevent John from appearing again. Franklin, Maki, and Bonolinov, go and help Nobunaga. Don't let him be ambushed. Don't underestimate that guy. You can choose to surround him, and protect Uvajin. The rest of you, come with me, and be careful of that guy's sudden appearance. Kurolo instantly assigned the personnel. Boss, speaking of which, I know that kid. Kurolo turned his head in surprise and looked at Shulnark, listening attentively. Actually, we're not particularly familiar. I went to take the Hunter Association exam this year, and he was one of the examinees. If I remember correctly, he should be called Joseph Joestar, and he's considered my classmate. Of course, the name might be a fake name. Seeing Kurolo's curious gaze, Shulnark didn't keep him in suspense. We were partners for a while back then, but he basically didn't take action much. I don't know his abilities very well. I didn't specifically investigate him. His strength was average at the time, but he could block the antenna of my black voice. During the exam, he was still a novice in terms of Nen, and couldn't even use 10. Kurolo looked at him, confirming that he wasn't lying. He nodded, still very solemn and thoughtful. You're saying that half a year ago, he was still a beginner who couldn't even use 10, and now he can kill Uvajin? What a joke! What do you take Uvajin for? It was Finks. Although his relationship with Uvajin was average, he still recognized Uvajin's strength. He couldn't believe that Uvajin would be defeated by a beginner. Nothing is impossible in Nen abilities. You can't use conventional thinking to think about Nen abilities. Finks didn't say anything else. The main reason was that it was difficult to accept. After all, he and Uvajin had a 4-6 chance of winning, with him at 4 and Uvajin at 6. If that kid could kill Uvajin, it would be tantamount to saying that he could also kill himself. That level of attack, what a joke! John, in the mirror world, didn't know what was happening outside, but he could use Epitaph to see what would happen after coming out of the mirror world, and infer the opponent's position through this. Just now, John used the mirror surface on the knife he had just pulled out of Uvajin's head to achieve the transfer. The darkness brought great trouble to the mirror man. The mirror man's ability mainly relied on mirror reflection. If it was a dark night without light, John could only enter and exit the mirror world in places very close to the mirror that could be illuminated by the mirror. If it was daytime, when the mirror illuminated a distant place, John could enter and exit the mirror world from a long distance. John was still wary of the boss and the other two strangers. In the manga, the boss only had one battle with the assassins of the Zaldik family, and he only used a few abilities. John didn't know what abilities were still stored in his skill hunter. Another thing was that John didn't recognize the other two people in the troupe. This wasn't in the manga. They should have been replaced at the beginning of the anime plot. Based on the personnel changes, the two of them should correspond to Shizuku and Hisoka's numbers in the original work. Hisoka killed the original owner of the number plate to join the troupe. Shizuku was special. She was invited. The original person was already dead, killed by Silva. That was an opponent that Silva said was a loss. After that, the Zaldik family rarely accepted requests related to the Phantom Troop. This person should not be simple either. The most important thing was that John's advantage as a transmigrator was useless for information about them. The battles of non-users, like stand users, are ever-changing. Information is a very important advantage. But John didn't have information about these two people. However, John wasn't the kind of person who completely relied on plot information. So many stands weren't just for show. Since they were all replaced, then their strength definitely wouldn't be particularly terrifying. At least Yuvajin and Nobunaga both lived until the beginning of the plot. The two of them wouldn't be much stronger than Yuvajin and Nobunaga. John threw Lindsay out of the mirror world early, and then asked him to go to town for help, so John didn't have to consider Lindsay as a burden for the time being. A pink, ugly face appeared under Lindsay's hood. This was the pre-effect of Epitaph. After predicting his future 7 seconds later, John decisively came out of the mirror world. He was right between the battlefield of Kurolo and the troop members and Phaeton and the old man, only 5 meters away from Kurolo. This distance was very dangerous for experts. Finks didn't think at all and punched directly. Well, very much in the style of an enhancer. The first reaction to a suddenly appearing enemy wasn't to create distance and guess the opponent's ability, but to directly find a chance to kill the opponent. No matter what, the routine of fighting first and then talking basically is a common problem of enhancers. Kurolo immediately took a step back, and unhurriedly raised his hand to summon a book. It was a dark red book with a blood-colored handprint on it, which looked very evil. This was Kurolo's non-ability skill Hunter. The pages turned automatically without wind, turning to one of the pages. At this time, Finks had already attacked. John wasn't panicked at all. To be honest, his threat wasn't as great as Yuvajin's. His power was weaker than Yuvajin's, but he was also the second strongest in the entire troop. However, no matter what his skills were, they had no impact on John. Anyway, he would be honest under Stone Freeze aura. Yuvajin's ultimate move, Big Bang Impact, didn't have time to be released when facing John. Big Bang Impact requires 3 to 4 seconds of energy gathering, and Finks' ultimate move, Ripper Cyclotron, which had even more preconditions, was even more impossible. Ripper Cyclotron actually has no use for John. When you're spinning around in circles of love, John can already run to the mirror world. As for speed, this is a crushing of the non system by the stand system. In the human world, apart from a few people who can keep up with speed A, Mahazaldik, Netero, most others are at most speed B, Xenozaldik, Phaeton, Silva. The power and speed A Stone Free is not afraid of a small Finks. Chapter 98. Stone Free. A slender, muscular arm burst from John's chest. For some unknown reason, Stone Free's originally feminine form gradually became more robust and masculine. Perhaps it was due to the influence of John's spirit. After all, a stand is the external manifestation of spiritual energy in the form of a ripple. John is a man, so it shouldn't be a problem for his stand to be male as well, right? Nobunaga said that damage to an non-beast would also affect the user, so Franklin simply wanted to destroy the non-beast. He didn't need to think too much, that wasn't his forte anyway. He just needed to attack. Planning and rescue were for the support team. He had complete faith in Krollo behind him. If he could just push him to reveal his full strength, Krollo would definitely find a way to eliminate him. That was Franklin's simple thought, and his greatest acknowledgement of Krollo. Franklin was one of the original 7 members of the Phantom Troop, one of the first to follow Krollo. Having grown up in Meteor City with Krollo, he deeply trusted Krollo's leadership. Stone Free directly blocked Franklin's attack and immediately counterattacked, punching Franklin in the face. But Franklin had already heard Nobunaga's intelligence and knew John's attacks were very fast, so he was prepared and wasn't caught off guard. He had used Nen to defend against Stone Free's attack from the start, so he wasn't badly hurt. He wasn't afraid of John using his aura on him, he had been prepared for it. John didn't see Franklin's resolve but didn't continue attacking either. This wasn't like before, when Yuvajin and Nobunaga underestimated him and it was basically a one-on-one fight. Now, the other troop members behind him were watching John with predatory eyes. They were planning a sneak attack, weren't they? They would definitely try to sneak attack. John didn't dare to be careless and strategically retreated a few steps. Franklin took advantage of this and pressed forward, not giving John a chance to relax. But John didn't dare to get too close to Phaeton and the old man's battlefield, it was too dangerous. What if Phaeton stopped trying to kill the old man and teamed up with Krollo to attack him? John would be in big trouble. Moreover, retreating further would take him out of Enigma's range. John would absolutely not compromise on this point, he couldn't leave Enigma's ability range. He only had one throwing knife left. If he wanted to save the old man, he had to seize the opportunity. But if his own life was in danger, it was more important to save himself, it was a matter of principle. After all, he wasn't familiar with that old man. John wasn't a saint, just an ordinary person, self-sacrifice was impossible. At most, he would help others when he had the ability and it didn't endanger his own life. John wouldn't risk his life to save others, perhaps this was the difference between John and the Golden Spirit. Compared to the Golden Spirit, John leaned more towards the pitch-black will, but he lacked the decisiveness of the pitch-black will. John took a light breath facing the attacking Franklin. Fortunately, he had been prepared for this, John still had a trump card. Epitaph activated instantly, displaying images of the future on the edge of his hood. At the same time, two black shadows feinted attacks from both sides. If John retreated, he would inevitably enter Phaeton and the old man's battlefield, and he would also bring the troop members in. Phaeton wouldn't allow others to steal his prey. If he entered, things would change. Originally, the troop members couldn't interfere because of Phaeton, but if John entered the battlefield, they could use the excuse that John was their prey to persuade Phaeton to allow Crollo and Franklin to join the battle. That way, not only would the old man be in trouble, but he himself might be screwed. Although staying here would definitely lead to being surrounded, it was the best solution to deal with this situation. But John immediately saw the situation clearly and adjusted his breathing. No matter what happened, he couldn't lose his rhythm. With steady breathing, John's mind calmed down. The more critical the situation, the less you can panic. This was a very useful habit John had developed since transmigrating. Not only was it necessary to maintain his ripple energy, but in battle, those who panicked were more likely to fall into the opponent's trap. Maintaining a clear head in battle was a valuable thing, and also one of the essential qualities of a high-level NAN user. Anyway, he had already killed Euvigen, and his feud with the troop had reached a point of no return. John wouldn't bother with brain-dead people. John didn't know that Euvigen was still barely alive, seeing the steel knife stuck in his forehead, he assumed Euvigen was dead. John also didn't know why he suddenly became so irritable just now, instantly killing Euvigen. If Crollo had the ability, he would definitely avenge his friend Euvigen, so John decided not to hold back. I'm done playing around. But even if he wasn't playing around, John still didn't want to reveal the specific ability of King Crimson's time erasure, mainly because he was afraid that Crollo would set up a trap targeting it. Time erasure and Enigma was still John's trump card, and he didn't plan to expose it. But he would use other stand abilities without hesitation if they were effective, regardless of whether the information would be leaked. John didn't use Stone Free to defend. Franklin didn't think much and directly punched John in the chest. This punch was infused with a large amount of NAN and was extremely powerful. John was directly sent flying, towards the area where the old man and Phaeton were, just as Crollo had hoped. But Crollo felt a sudden unease in his heart, sensing that something was wrong. Although Franklin's punch wasn't as terrifying as Euvigen's, it was more than enough to punch through a steel plate, but it shouldn't have been able to send John flying. Even Euvigen, who had greater strength than him, hadn't been able to send John flying, what made Franklin think he could. But all of this seemed so natural to the troop members. They didn't know John had Lover's body, didn't know John could turn into string to avoid damage, and didn't know that Euvigen had been helpless against John. They simply exclaimed that John's use of Ren was fast, otherwise he would have been KO'd. Only Crollo knew it wouldn't be that simple. The person who killed Euvigen could definitely not be defeated so easily. Crollo was relatively accurate in judging people, John wasn't the type of opponent who was a holy mother. He wasn't so enthusiastic about rescuing the old man. He was more like a child who wanted to show off his strength, and it was impossible for him to have come simply to save the old man. In fact, even John himself hadn't noticed this, his motivation for saving the old man wasn't that pure. He now wanted to complete his performance in front of these high-level NAN users from the Phantom Troop, and feel the pleasure of the troop being helpless against him. Chapter 99. Right now, John really wanted to shout, "This is my escape route." But shouting it out would alert them, so John forcefully suppressed the urge to make a joke and cooperated with Phaeton to fly up. At the same time, it caused the two shadows preparing to ambush from the side to miss their target. Taking advantage of the observation from the air, John clearly saw the figures of the people who had just come to attack from the left and right. The faces of those two people were very pale, unlike normal humans, and having not seen these two people before, the phantom troupe shouldn't have these two. Moreover, they were several levels weaker than the other members of the troupe. A strangely shaped knife appeared in Krollo's hand. John didn't know whether Krollo was cautiously finishing him off, or whether he had seen through his plan. John was also shocked when he saw Krollo's movements. Krollo held the skill hunter in one hand and stabbed at John with the knife in the other. Just by looking at this knife, you know there must be a problem, either a curse or poison, definitely can't touch it. John guessed correctly, this knife contained a violent poison, and even the user himself had no antidote. In other words, being stabbed by this knife would definitely mean death. The members of the troupe didn't continue attacking because Krollo was approaching John, giving Krollo space. At this time, John was about to land. Looks like there's no chance to hide my trump card. I originally wanted to give them a surprise, but it's about the same now. Magician's Red. John, who was about to land, calmly muttered words that Krollo couldn't understand as he watched Krollo approaching rapidly. But Krollo immediately understood. A crimson-red turkey? No, a crimson-red bird-headed man emerged from John's chest. The red bird-headed man was emitting scorching flames from his hands, and its loud cry attracted the attention of everyone on the field. Magician's Red was drawn by John as a reward for defeating Uvajin, and this is one of John's reliance for coming to the Phantom Troop's headquarters to show off. Stand, Magician's Red. Destructive power, B. Speed, B. Range, C. Persistence, B. Precision, C. Development potential, D. Considered one of the earliest stands to appear, its ability is very simple and straightforward, which is to control fire and heat. It is the stand of Mohammed Afdal, a famous fortune teller on the streets of Cairo, a core member of the Egyptian god team. Magician's Red doesn't have the strong explosive power of Silver Chariot and Star Platinum, nor does it have the high attack range and powerful control ability of Hierophant Green. However, Magician's Red can control fire on a large scale, and its coverage, endurance, and adaptability are all very good. Large-scale fire control can not only dissuade many interfering small fries, but also create a favorable environment to weaken the opponent. Even if the flames can't kill the opponent, most people can't exert their full strength in a high-temperature environment, which can weaken the opponent to the greatest extent. Moreover, Magician's Red is second to none in terms of seizing the initiative and breaking away from passivity. To be honest, not many people can defend against Magician's Red's flames, at least Krollo has no way to ignore it. Magician's Red's flame temperature is very high. It was said in the first episode of the third part that it can easily melt an iron rod instantly. Even Uvajin, who has the thickest skin, might be burned if he directly takes Magician's Red's attack. The only person who can be immune may be Phaeton, who has activated Pain Packer. Let's put it this way, as long as Phaeton dares to do that, John will run away without saying a word. He will slip into the mirror world and definitely won't come out, but without Phaeton going all out, John has already thought of a way to deal with him. Krollo has already been dissuaded by the high-temperature flames of Magician's Red. John can completely open a Do Not Disturb flame barrier and leave directly, no one can stop him. The most amazing thing is that Magician's Red can control a circle around his body at room temperature, which means that John can activate Magician's Red and Stone Free at the same time without burning Stone Free. However, he can't use more ultimate moves such as Caution Tape. Magician's Red's precision is only C, so it can't complete high-precision movements. Although Krollo knew he had been tricked the moment Magician's Red appeared, he immediately distanced himself. However, the close-range burst still caused Krollo to suffer a lot of injuries, and a small tuft of hair was burned off. The heat wave hitting him made Krollo's eyes only able to squint. John was a little disappointed. John predicted that the sneak attack just now could have caused greater damage. He didn't expect Krollo to be so decisive in backing down. Actually, it's not that Krollo backed down, but because the high temperature of Magician's Red made Krollo instinctively dodge. This is Krollo's combat intuition honed over the years, which saved him again. After John landed, he slid on the ground for 2 or 3 meters before stopping. He didn't get up immediately, but continued to roll on the ground a few times, relying on inertia. Franklin, who was guarding Uvajin next to Uvajin, also launched an attack. John was only 200 meters away from him, not far. But it was difficult to see the other person's figure in the dark, and his end couldn't open that wide. Although John successfully dissuaded Krollo with Magician's Red, the flames of Magician's Red also exposed his position, as obvious as a flower butterfly in a group of flies. Even from a distance, you can still see the bright flame in the dark night. Bullets poured down, but John had already thought of a solution. Magician's Red opened his hands and built a wall of fire, blocking everyone's sight. This way, the troop couldn't determine John's exact location. Most of the bullets that occasionally shot at John were almost melted by the wall of fire. In addition, with Silver Chariot's obstruction, no bullets could get close to John's body. John silently unequipped Stone Free and equipped Crazy Diamond. Stone Free is John's first stand, and it's also the one John has developed the best, and its abilities are very powerful. But John, who has been away for a long time, unequipped the familiar Stone Free. John judged that Stone Free would not be of any use in the next battle. Now John's slots are, Magician's Red, King Crimson, Man in the Mirror, Silver Chariot, Crazy Diamond. Chapter 100. John did not run, he slowly walked into Phaeton's battlefield. It looked very impressive, but in reality, John wanted to rush over and get things done directly. However, Epitaph was still cooling down, and without the guarantee of Epitaph's prediction, John didn't dare to attack rashly. This was Phaeton, the fastest member of the troop. Even the slightest mistake could cost him his life. Actually, Phaeton and the old man had seen John approaching long ago. To be honest, Magician's Red's exaggerated special effects made it hard not to notice, but neither side stopped fighting. Although Phaeton was wary, he didn't know that Uvajin had already been defeated by John. However, breaking through the troop's defenses still surprised them both. But after seeing John's wall of fire, the old man's doubts were dispelled. However, Phaeton still frowned. He knew that these alone could never defeat his monstrous teammates. He must have more up his sleeve. But just these tricks weren't enough to save the old man and escape the troop's encirclement. Phaeton wasn't good at thinking, so he simply stopped thinking. Before John could walk over, he would prioritize dealing with the old man who had a grudge against him. The old man had slashed Phaeton several times. "Young man, you should leave. This old man is very strong. Dealing with this kind of brat is no problem," the old man said. He knew he couldn't escape, so he wanted John to run away. John didn't respond at all, as if he hadn't heard the old man's words. The old man kept fighting with Phaeton, unaware that although Phaeton was strong, no one in the troop had ever said that Phaeton was the strongest. At least Nobunaga, Finks, and Krollo wouldn't accept that. Obviously, there were more opponents outside. However, John didn't refute the old man's idea. Perhaps after obtaining the invincible combination of Man in the Mirror and King Crimson, John basically couldn't die, and he became more and more arrogant and reckless. Of course, it was also possible that John had just taken down Uvajin, one of the troop's combatants, and now John could be described as triumphant. John wasn't thinking about how to save the old man and pull him into the mirror world, but how to escape after killing Phaeton. John was walking very dashingly now, because no one dared to approach the flames emitted by Magician's Red. In fact, if everyone in the troop used Ken, they could withstand Magician's Red's flames for a short time, but they didn't dare to. Because John had too many abilities. Even if they got close, they wouldn't necessarily be able to defeat Stone Free, who had terrifying close combat abilities. Moreover, they all knew that John could fix people in a certain place, and they couldn't withstand being burned by the fire all the time. Of the entire troop, only Uvajin and Phaeton were confident in killing John in Magician's Red's wall of fire. Uvajin had already been killed by John and was now a vegetable. It was debatable whether he could wake up. Phaeton was fully engaged in dealing with the old man. If he didn't focus on dealing with the old man, he could die at any time. Sure enough, Magician's Red's precision was only C. A close-range skill like a flame shield couldn't completely isolate the heat. The heat wave also made John sweat profusely. It was too realistic. John couldn't help but click his tongue, but fortunately, no one could tell. He could continue to act like A.B. John's expression remained unchanged, looking calm and collected, with a dashing aura that suggested he had no rivals in sight. Life had to go on, and acting cool couldn't stop. If others saw through him, then John's plan would fall through. This kind of momentum could give Phaeton a great sense of oppression, forcing Phaeton to spare some energy to guard against John, which could reduce the old man's pressure. Phaeton was indeed wary of John's sneak attack. After all, he was the man who had crossed the troop's defensive line. What he didn't know was that John didn't have the ability to sneak attack Phaeton. Silver Chariot's attack speed was slightly better than Phaeton's, but there was a fatal flaw: its movement speed basically couldn't even touch the hem of Phaeton's clothes. So, John never intended to sneak attack Phaeton from the beginning. His idea was simple: just walk over. Walk directly to the old man's side and then take him away with man in the mirror. This was an open scheme. As long as Phaeton dared to get close, John's silver chariot, with its near light speed attack speed, was not afraid of Phaeton at all. John had epitaph and wasn't afraid of Phaeton's sneak attacks. As long as Phaeton didn't use Pain Packer, John didn't think Phaeton had any other moves that could hurt him. Even if Phaeton used Pain Packer regardless of everything, John was confident that he could run to the mirror world. Moreover, with Yuvajan's life and death unknown, it would be difficult for Nobunaga and the others to move Yuvajan out of the attack range if he used Pain Packer now. However, John didn't know because in John's view, Yuvajan was already dead. Phaeton also didn't know about Yuvajan's situation, but he had an agreement with Krollo, the leader, that he couldn't use Pain Packer, because the ruins were nearby, and it might damage the valuable things inside. If Krollo hadn't made a 3-chapter agreement with Phaeton before, Phaeton would have used Pain Packer on the old man long ago. John felt someone charging through the wall of fire behind him. John took a closer look and saw that it was Finks. The golden hair on his head was scorched and stained with a lot of soot, no longer oily and shiny. John could see the layer of Nen around Finks' body at a glance. It was this layer of Nen that blocked the flames. Finks used Ken to barely break through, but Ken couldn't completely defend against this high temperature, and the clothes on his body also showed signs of burning. John didn't understand the meaning of Finks rushing over. Just defending like this would consume most of Finks' Nen and energy. Theoretically, he wouldn't have extra strength to attack John. Moreover, he should also know that John's Stone Free had the combat power to make Yuvajan suffer in close combat. Where did he get the confidence to risk attacking John in such a disadvantageous situation? John sensed the aura of conspiracy, but he didn't know what was happening. John wasn't a person who was good at thinking, so John chose a simple and crude solution: epitaph. Under the grey-black hood, a pink face appeared on John's forehead. A string of images appeared on the edge of the hood. This was the future 7 seconds later. Seeing the scene in the future, John suddenly understood and realized the scheme set up by Krollo. John immediately turned around to face Finks, raised his hands, put them together, and then pulled them apart. Many golden bubbles were produced between his two palms. That's right, it was Caesar's ripple cutter, golden bubbles spinning towards Finks' left side. Finks wasn't pleasantly surprised by John's miss, instead, he looked at John with great surprise. Instantly, a fiery red figure emerged from the wall of fire on Finks' left side. It wasn't a living person, it was a puppet whose body was dyed fiery red, almost deceiving John's eyes. However, John's perception of fire was max. How could Magician's Red not notice such a hole suddenly appearing in the flames? But Finks' attack was far from over. Chapter 101. The ripple-cutting blade could also be considered one of the rewards John received after defeating Yuvajan. The ripple-cutting blade was originally one of Caesar's signature moves, using the centrifugal force generated by rapidly spinning ripple soap bubbles to form a disc-shaped ripple-spinning blade, with extremely high destructive power. However, in the original story, Caesar also needed to use special soapy water to activate it. I don't know why, but perhaps because it's a product of the system, even the special soapy water is omitted. It can be fired directly, but it consumes a bit of Nen. This makes John suspect whether the soapy water is created with Nen. The power of the ripple-cutting blade is not bad, but it's still slightly insufficient to deal with the enhancer like Finks, but it's more than enough to deal with that puppet. Now, the ripple-cutting blade is cutting into the puppet's body. Although it didn't have the effect John expected, it still successfully hindered the puppet's movements. The ripple bubbles also disappeared instantly after attacking the puppet. Only then did John remember that the essence of the ripple-cutting blade is still soap bubbles, but now it's in the high-temperature environment created by Magician's Red, and water-based bubbles can't last too long. Even Caesar's ripple-cutting bubbles might not be much stronger than John's, but because of the world's limitations, coupled with training and abilities, John's physical qualities far exceed Caesar's, but John's resolve and will are far inferior to Caesar's. However, with a sufficient amount of ripple, he still achieved the expected effect. The ripple bubbles have already cut through the puppet's hands and feet, and the puppet's legs are basically about to be sawed off. This puppet's fire resistance is strong enough, but its defensive power and speed are both lacking. All of this was within Krollo's expectations, and Finks's mouth unconsciously curved into a smile. The fist in his hand became brighter and brighter. No, that's not right. John could still see Finks rotating his wrist while using Ken to defend against the flames. A brilliant light surged from Finks's right fist. John's pupil shrank. This is Finks's strongest ultimate move, Ripper Cyclotron. Although the name is very similar to the Hyuga clan's ultimate defense technique in Naruto, the abilities are completely different. Finks's Ripper Cyclotron is a purely offensive skill, increasing the power of the fist by constantly rotating it. The original story never mentioned the limit of Ripper Cyclotron. Theoretically, as long as the number of rotations is sufficient, the power of the fist will be greater. Normally, John would never let him slowly rotate his fist, but Magician's Red's flame barrier also blocked John's own vision. John didn't know how many times Finks had rotated, and didn't know how powerful this punch was. At this time, Finks directed the nin in his body to his hands and feet, basically abandoning defense in exchange for a terrifying burst of speed. Run! John's hands were still hanging down, as if he was frightened. This is the difference between a professional Ripple user and an amateur Ripple user like John. A truly tested Ripple user has a golden spirit, understands fear and embraces it, and overcomes fear. But John maintains his composure with the powerful stand ability. John was really frightened. Since obtaining King Crimson, this was the closest he had been to death. Finks's fist was only 30 centimeters away from John's head, and he swung his fist extremely fast. John could feel the majestic nin full of destructive aura on the fist. A gap was also cut open in the fire curtain behind him. Only then did John realize that the run just now was to remind John that Phaeton was coming. 40 seconds ago, Crollo raised his hand and waved it at Phaeton, who had just completed an attack. Although Phaeton was short, he was now standing on a branch and could clearly see Crollo's gesture. He was surprised. This gesture represented a joint action. The last joint action was to deal with an enforcement team of 200 people with a large number of experienced nin users. Dealing with a single-digit number of enemies actually required the Phantom Troop to take joint action, which made Phaeton very curious. Phaeton did not attack after receiving the message, but the old man on the ground was focused on Phaeton. Unlike Phaeton, he couldn't run far to rest. His nerves had to be tense at all times. He didn't notice Crollo's small movements. Even if he wanted to see, it was useless. John's Magician's Red's fire curtain blocked the old man's line of sight. It wasn't until the moment Phaeton rushed into the fire curtain that the old man knew that Phaeton's target had changed to John. But his running speed was far inferior to Phaeton's, and going there would be suicide, so he could only shout a warning. Phaeton's speed reached supersonic. Theoretically, he should have arrived next to John earlier than the old man's reminder, but although he was not afraid of fire, he still couldn't find John in the fire, so John was able to hear the sound. However, the sound of John's ripple-cutting blade hitting the puppet just now still exposed John's location. When Phaeton was on the tree, he also received a bullet. Although the old man knew there was a problem, he couldn't see anything wrong. The other members of the Phantom Troop, that is, Phaeton's teammate Pakunoda, fired a shot at Phaeton. Phaeton did not resist and directly took it. If John saw it, he would know that the teammate who fired the gun was Pakunoda, the Phantom Troop's support personnel. Her ability is to search the opponent's memory, and she can also put the memory into a bullet and shoot it to her teammates. She put Crollo's plan to deal with John into a bullet and shot it to Phaeton. If it was someone else's order, Phaeton would definitely prioritize solving the old man who had a grudge against him, but Phaeton still listened to Crollo's order, and the opponent was also a master who brought Uvijin to the brink of death and embarrassed Nobunaga. Phaeton knew what was important, pretended to attack the old man, and immediately turned around and rushed towards John. He also summoned the Pain Packer armor, so he didn't need to waste nin to resist the scorching and high temperature of the flames when he entered John's fire wall, and his strength was basically completely preserved. But what happened next was beyond everyone's expectations, or rather, the situation that exceeded Crollo's prior assumptions appeared, and what was even more terrifying was that they still didn't know how John did it. Chapter 102. Phaeton's blade didn't strike John, instead, it pierced Fink's left arm. Fink's whirlwind attack completely hit the ground, sending shards of stone flying against Phaeton's fireproof armor. He couldn't comprehend what had happened. He had clearly swung his sword at John. Even if the attack had passed through him harmlessly, he wouldn't have been surprised. He had originally planned that if John was directly killed by the slash, that would be best, but if he used that state, he would frantically slash around John until John exited that state. Phaeton knew through Pakunoda's memory bullets that John had a state that could temporarily immunize him from attacks. Even if John had vanished into thin air, Phaeton wouldn't have been surprised, but the current situation was completely different from what he had envisioned. It was as if he hadn't braked in time, stabbing his sword into Fink's arm. This bizarre scene made Phaeton momentarily stunned, but it was only for that instant. Fink's pupils contracted after being scorched by high temperatures and then struck by his teammate. Normally, Phaeton would have noticed Fink's abnormality due to their years of tacit understanding, but now he simply thought that Finks was as surprised as he was. However, he quickly noticed that Finks was staring at something, and he felt a chill. It was the threat of death. He didn't take the time to turn around, but instead, held his sword behind him in a suichin carrying the sword stance. But it was still too slow. Silver Chariot's speed was close to the speed of light, instantly piercing several bloody holes in Phaeton's back. To explain what just happened, John activated King Crimson Time Erasure when he discovered their pincer attack. However, Fink's fist and Phaeton's sword didn't stop at all. In desperation, John fell backward, that is, in the direction of Phaeton, with Silver Chariot standing behind him. Because Time Erasure wasn't time stop, John couldn't attack the opponent during the Time Erasure process, but John could easily interfere with the movement of other things. Silver Chariot blocked in front of Phaeton's blade, using the force of the blade to pull himself to the side as he fell. Not only that, but John, forcibly calming himself down, fully activated Ripple Energy. Perhaps because of fear, the power wasn't even half of what it usually was. Fortunately, it was still used, and the ripple gathered to the chest and abdomen, turning into ripple bubbles, enveloping John's body. This was the ripple cushion John used to reduce the impact. However, these ripple bubbles shattered the moment they came into contact with Whirlwind, like a string of ordinary soap bubbles, but John knew that these ripple-infused bubbles were difficult to even puncture with a blade. With the barrier of the ripple soap bubbles, plus the elasticity of the ripple soap bubbles, John was bounced out of the main attack range of Whirlwind. Whirlwind ultimately only grazed John's chest, directly cutting off a piece of flesh from John's chest, but fortunately, his life wasn't in danger. It was unknown how many rotations Fink's fist had made, but there was no doubt that being hit by that punch would have cost John his life. Both linearization and Lover's body had their limits. At the same time, because of John's obstruction, Phaeton's sword was deflected, only leaving a relatively deep bloodstain on John's shoulder. But John was very happy, he had survived again. Now, they would no longer have a chance to kill him. Time Erasure hadn't passed yet. The previous action only took 1 second. John had plenty of time to go behind either of them and deliver a fatal blow. John chose Phaeton, whose physical strength was relatively intact. John wasn't sure if Phaeton's speed would allow him to quickly counterattack after John attacked Fink's, and as it stood, Phaeton's threat was far greater than Fink's. As long as he didn't give Fink's a chance to use Whirlwind, John could easily grind him to death with a kiting tactic. Even if he was hit, John could accept it, as long as it wasn't Whirlwind, Lover's body could withstand it. Just now, it was because the flames blocked his vision, but now, face to face, John would never give him that chance. Now, John was still maintaining Magician's Red's flames, and not only that, but he also deliberately controlled the flames to surge towards Fink's with all his might. After all, Phaeton was immune to flames. John unhurriedly went behind Phaeton, completely withdrawing the flames around Phaeton, watching the flames burn Fink's body, emitting a burst of nauseating roasted meat smell. During the Time Erasure process, the opponent is unconscious, so there is no way to control the Nen to return to the body for defense, so Fink's, except for his Nen-covered hands and feet, had large areas of burns. All of this was beyond Fink's expectations. According to his calculations, he could barely withstand being exposed to the flames for a short time, but in an instant, it was as if he had been roasted by the fire for a long time. The large areas of burns almost instantly caused Fink's to completely lose his combat power. The current Fink's no longer had the ability to continue fighting John, and his attack speed was not enough to save Phaeton, who was in danger. However, Phaeton's red armor seemed to have increased his defense, and King Crimson couldn't break through the armor. But the result was quite good, the armor was dented, and judging from the sound, several ribs should have been broken. John frowned, this result didn't meet John's expectations. But it didn't matter, anyway, Fink's and Phaeton could only run away one of them. He also had to be careful of sneak attacks from other members of the Phantom Troop. John narrowed his eyes and continued to attack Phaeton. Although Phaeton was injured, it didn't have a particularly large impact on his combat power, at least not on his explosiveness. Phaeton used the impact of King Crimson's fist to fly a distance further towards Fink's. If he turned around directly in front of John, the flaw might be exploited by John. So, he followed the direction of the attack to first create a certain distance. However, John also roughly measured Phaeton's defensive ability. Converted into Stand's destructive power, it had to be at least B or higher to cause effective damage. It was best to use a stand with destructive power A. He didn't care about others and could slowly wear down the opponent with his stand. But for Phaeton, it was best to determine the victory with one blow. If Phaeton was pushed too hard, then a person who cannot be forgiven would come out, and everyone would stop playing. John didn't hold back and immediately summoned King Crimson, the most destructive stand in John's hand. Although John usually rarely fully summoned King Crimson, only summoning a part of it for Epitaph, King Crimson's destructive power was undoubtedly stronger than Stone Free, which was still growing. King Crimson, erase the following time. A red light flashed, and the whole world turned grey again in John's eyes. Friendly reminder, the website is about to be revised, which may cause the reading progress to be lost. Please save bookshelf and reading record in time. It is recommended to save screenshots. We apologize for the inconvenience. Chapter 103. A red light flashed around, and all the surrounding scenery turned grey in John's eyes. If the flames weren't still moving, John would have thought the world had stopped. John took out the throwing knife tied to his coat again. This was the last throwing knife John had, but he didn't hesitate. He still had a backup plan. Even without the mirror knife, he could find a way to escape into the mirror world. This throwing knife was just insurance, but he was willing to go all out to kill Phaeton. John had no intention of fighting the monsters of the troop, but the troop members were too valuable. Just defeating Euvigen earned John nearly 8 universal cards worth of gold coins. It seemed that the troop members had a super high rating in the system. This amount of gold coins was more than all the gold coins John had won since leaving the Heavens Arena. If John had to do daily tasks every day, it would take almost a year. No wonder people say that killing and arson bring riches. The ancients did not deceive me. Now, Phaeton and Sphinx were John's hope of obtaining Star Platinum. John used to want to stay far away when he saw the troop, but now the troop members were all stands in his eyes. John repeated his old trick, using Crimson King to output power into the throwing knife like crazy. This kind of stability was not high, and Phaeton happened to be one of the few people who could interfere with this move. John couldn't rest assured, this sneak attack had to succeed, failure was unforgivable. Moreover, John wasn't sure if the temperature of the mirror world would also change with the outside temperature. So, John wouldn't give Phaeton a chance to use Unforgiven. Based on the principle of eradicating evil, John came to Phaeton's side and decided that if that move failed, he would finish it off with his main body. This way, Phaeton had to choose whether to defend against John's Crimson King and Silver Chariot's close quarters attacks, or to defend against the throwing knife doubly enhanced by Crimson King and craft work. Then, John quietly waited for time erase to end, waiting for Phaeton to make a choice. With Crimson King and Silver Chariot nearby, Phaeton had little chance to escape unless he removed the armor of Unforgiven, but that would result in being burned by Magician's Red. Honestly, John would rather Phaeton block Crimson King because once the throwing knife hit, death was certain. John snapped his fingers, and time began to flow normally again. Everything began to regain its original color. Time erase had ended. Phaeton had just finished turning around, preparing to counterattack. But he suddenly found that John's figure had disappeared from his sight, with only a small knife floating in the air. The corner of his eye caught a glimpse of a humanoid shadow on his left side. The fear of death occupied Phaeton's heart. John released craft work, and the throwing knife instantly shot out. A silver-white flash shot straight at Phaeton's left chest, where his heart was located. But a variable appeared. Sphinx, who John had thought was already unconscious, gathered all his aura and threw a punch the instant he saw John, without any hesitation. In fact, Sphinx's punch was very heavy, and his strength was only slightly weaker than Euvigen. He came towards John himself. With burns all over his body, a normal person would have already lost consciousness, but Sphinx relied on his monstrous physique to endure it. But this wasn't the ending John wanted to see. John breathed a sigh of relief. Fortunately there were other stands. Silver Chariot immediately waved its sword to dissuade Sphinx, and then used Crimson King to attack Phaeton. As expected, Phaeton, when facing John, probably thought that Crimson King's danger was far greater than that inconspicuous throwing knife. Crimson King punched Phaeton's blade and was blocked, but the throwing knife had arrived. The throwing knife passed through Phaeton's chest as if there was no resistance. A vertical blood hole appeared in Phaeton's chest. John looked at the familiar scene and slowly exhaled a sigh of relief. He had finally achieved it. In fact, John had used Epitaph to predict it before the attack, and he had finally achieved the predicted result. Even if Phaeton wasn't dead, he had no combat power left. Phaeton! Finks roared in disbelief, not believing that Phaeton had been taken down like this. But John was very happy. Phaeton had basically been taken down, and Finks was not a concern. Not fast enough, not enough power in his moves, too long of a wind-up for his ultimate move, and also heavily injured. Finks's defeat was a certainty. After roaring, Finks burst out with a powerful aura all over his body. This was Ren. John frowned. Of course, he wasn't scared by Finks's aura. Jojo's aura when he was angry wasn't much weaker than this. Could it be that he was blinded by anger? John guessed. Ren consumed a lot of aura, and it wasn't as good as Ken in terms of defense. In John's opinion, using Ren in this situation was very unwise, knowing that John hadn't come into contact with Magician's Red's flames yet. But what happened next exceeded John's expectations. A terrifying amount of blood burst out from Phaeton's wound. John realized that he hadn't completely cut through the heart. Just now, Crimson King's power had shifted Phaeton's position a little, so the throwing knife had pierced next to the heart. But it should have pierced Phaeton's artery. Blood spurted out like a fountain, and Phaeton also lost consciousness and fainted. Finks grabbed Phaeton, and suddenly Finks flew backwards at a rapid speed in a strange posture. Only then did John notice that a thin thread of aura was connected to Finks's back. John's pupil shrank. The situation was too critical just now, and he hadn't noticed that Finks still had a backup plan. But it was too late now. John's running speed couldn't keep up with Finks. John punched the ground. Damn it, he got away. John regretted not observing Finks carefully. That Ren just now should have been the signal to retreat. The troop members outside felt Finks's Ren and immediately used the line connected to Finks to pull him out. John lost at least 8 universal cards worth of gold coins because he didn't observe carefully. This was a mistake that shouldn't have been made. That line was actually quite thick, and it had fireproof material on it. In order to pull such a big man like Finks, the line couldn't be thin, and John, as a master of playing with lines, the owner of Stone Free, didn't see through this backup plan. But John quickly adjusted. Killing Phaeton was already an unexpected surprise, and Finks was also judged by the system as having fled, so there was also a reward. Overall, John's adventure was not a loss. At the same time, outside the fire wall, Shulnark's hands were almost blurred, typing on a laptop, searching for John's information online. The members of the troop stood outside the fire wall, ready to use the line connected to Finks to rescue him as soon as they sensed Finks's Ren. Shulnark, have you found that guy's information yet? Wait a minute, it's not that fast. He used a fake name. I can't find anyone named Joseph. The light was bad just now, and the recognition rate of the uploaded photo is very low. Don't find out after we've killed him. Shulnark had only recently joined the association as an ordinary hunter, and his permission level wasn't high. Also, Shulnark's hacking skills were very average, and he was only considered outstanding in the basically computer illiterate troop, Phantom Troop. Suddenly, a paid interface popped up, which was a hunter website for buying and selling information. Shulnark didn't hesitate and directly paid the relevant fees. It's out, but the internet here is bad, it will take about 5 more seconds to load. Hearing this, Kurora and the other members also gathered around to see what kind of god John was. The web page that was supposed to take 5 seconds to load was loaded instantly, and Kurora also teleported from a few meters away to the front of the computer. Everyone noticed this strange feeling. I was clearly walking here just now, why? Kurora didn't panic and calmly analyzed the situation. That must be that brat's ability just now, but what's the point of him moving us? Chapter 104. Before Kurora could react, a powerful Nen surged from within the fire wall. It was familiar, Finks' Nen, but that also meant Finks' assassination attempt had failed and he was in grave danger. Even through the fire wall, the Nen could be clearly felt, that aura of anger. Anger? Kurora frowned. Without fear or madness, it meant Finks should be alright. But why call for help? Could it be Phaeton? Kurora immediately guessed most of the situation, but his hands didn't stop. He pulled the threads that Maki had conjured with all his strength. Before long, Finks flew out of the fire wall, carrying Phaeton, who had lost consciousness after his ability was dispelled. Finks' injuries were appalling. His clothes had long been burned away. This wasn't a manga world, there were no convenient underpants. Finks had barely managed to protect his body in the flames, not daring to waste extranon on maintaining his clothes. He was covered in red and black, his appearance quite horrifying. After flying out of the fire wall, Finks finally relaxed and passed out. Kurora caught Finks as he was about to fall to the ground. Phaeton was still held tightly in Finks' arms, but he had already lost consciousness. Kurora immediately summoned Skill Hunter and opened it to a page. A scalpel appeared in Kurora's hand. This was one of the abilities Kurora had stolen, allowing him to quickly perform surgery when outdoor rescue equipment was insufficient. It had no combat power but was excellent for emergency treatment of some injuries. He had just used this on Uvajin. In just 30 seconds, Kurora removed the throwing knife from Phaeton's chest and performed temporary hemostasis. His ability wasn't very effective for burns, but he still did some simple disinfection. These injuries would be fatal to normal people, but Finks' body was extraordinary, a monster no less than Uvajin. These injuries wouldn't kill him. Phaeton also woke up. He had been seriously injured, and to prevent John from attacking again and to prevent excessive blood loss and death, he had entered a state of suspended animation. He was absolutely certain that Finks could get him out. At the same time, inside the fire wall, John knew that the troop wouldn't make any major moves for the time being until they figured out his ability. After all, he had just taken down 3 of their top fighters. They weren't gourd babies, coming one by one to their deaths. They wouldn't dare to continue attacking without understanding the opponent's strength. John reached into his pocket and touched the tinfoil as he approached the old man. That's right, this tinfoil was John's trump card. Tinfoil is one of the raw materials for making mirrors and also has reflective properties. It can be used as a mirror, but the efficiency of Mirror Man using tinfoil isn't as high as using a real mirror. This was the last mirror on John's body, his only hope of escape. To take down the troop, he had basically revealed all his trump cards. He must run out before the next attack. John's doppelgangers had basically all been used. They were gaining a better understanding of John's abilities. Without a surprise attack, John would be completely outmatched by the troop in terms of combat experience. At the same time, a small, thin man with blue clothes and white hair covering his face ran quickly out of the ruins. He ran quickly towards the direction where Kurora was. Boss! Something happened. Kurora frowned and turned his head to look at Koltapai. What is it? Death aura, or some ancient, leftover mechanical puppet. Koltapai wasn't a combatant, his strength was relatively weak compared to other members. He was able to join entirely because of his powerful ability, Divine Left Hand, Demonic Right Hand, which could perfectly copy objects, although they could only be maintained for 24 hours. Moreover, he could sense the location of the copied objects. His combat power was very weak, so he basically had no combat scenes in the anime. Even when dealing with the Mafia and the Shadow Beasts, he didn't take action, let alone in the later Meteor City Ant extermination operation. Koltapai said in a panic, "No, what mechanism? I feel like these things are fake. Among the people protecting these ruins, there must be someone with a similar ability to mine. I found that although these things look very old, there is a sense of disharmony, and then an aura on the murals in these ruins doesn't feel malicious. Most importantly, I didn't find any poison or traps inside." Hearing this, Kurora's eyes narrowed. Before, it was possible that Koltapai's intuition had a problem, but there was absolutely no way that there were no traps or poison. Ancient people were also afraid of tomb raiders. Some powerful people would use human sacrifices during the construction of their tombs, which would generate a lot of death aura that could protect the tomb and curse the tomb raiders. Even if the originally remaining Nan aura had dissipated, they would at least put some poison and traps in place. These things wouldn't dissipate. It was impossible for such a large tomb to have no defenses. In other words, this was just a trap. Could it be a trap set to capture the troop members? No, impossible. If it was to deal with the troop, they shouldn't have sent so few people. The combat power of these hunters was also uneven, and the people who had just died didn't seem to know about the existence of the troop. However, it couldn't be ruled out that the planner of this siege underestimated the troops' combat power. Among the defenders this time, only the old man and the middle-aged man Kurora had just killed, as well as a strange uncle in purple clothes, were barely outstanding, and finally there was John, whose ability was bizarre and a huge threat. "Nobunaga, take Uvajin. Pakaru, Maki, take Phaeton, and Finks. We've been tricked. Retreat. This ruin is fake. They may want to besiege us. The others protect them. Franklin, go ahead and scout the way. Go to the town. Kurora had his own considerations for telling them to go to the town. This wasn't Yorna City, there weren't so many surveillance cameras. If they wanted to hide, the people besieging them wouldn't find them so quickly. Moreover, there were no big shots like the Tendons to help clean up the mess here. Killing people casually was illegal. The troop were wanted criminals anyway, so they weren't afraid, but the people besieging them certainly wouldn't dare to start a war in a crowded place like a town. Boss, what about you? I have a guess I want to verify. Rai's strange laughter came from the fire wall. Chapter 105. Rai. Kurora had absolutely no idea why John would make such a sound, exposing his position. However, after seeing the miserable states of Phaeton, Finks, and Uvajin, Kurora faced John with all his might, not daring to slack off. Kurora's strength and speed couldn't compare to those of the troop's combat personnel, but Kurora possessed a caution and combat intelligence that they lacked. Could it be that he had other undiscovered abilities? Kurora frowned and summoned a throwing knife from the skill hunter. It was called the chasing/bat knife, capable of targeting and locking onto an object emitting sound, launching an attack. Once locked on, it was an endless pursuit, either the sound source would be destroyed or the knife would be destroyed. It turned out to be the ability of a hunter who specialized in capturing Garen bats. Garen bats were very fast, small in size, and moved nimbly, making them very difficult to catch. To catch these bats, that hunter developed this ability, but Kurora snatched it away. The only drawback of this move was that it could only track sound, and its power was very weak. With a ding, the throwing knife seemed to hit something. However, John's laughter didn't stop, instead, it grew louder. That's right, many more places emitted the same laughter, and the sound didn't change at all. The throwing knife didn't track or break. Of course, Kurora wouldn't naively think that John had been taken care of, that was complete wishful thinking. It seemed like it was just a recording device used for interference. This made Kurora breathe a sigh of relief, he was still afraid that John had other abilities. However, the situation was urgent, and the enemy could come at any time. Fortunately, he had already had the wounded retreat. If John's ability was really as he guessed, then it was worth taking a gamble. Kurora chose a sound source and ran towards it. Of course, he wasn't prepared to find John in the flames all at once, he just hoped for some traces. Kurora's entire body erupted with nin, forming a thick membrane on his surface. Kurora did have some fire-resistant abilities in the skill hunter, but none of them were suitable for the current situation. Kurora had two kinds of fire-extinguishing abilities. One was a fire-extinguishing type, but Magician's Red's fire starting speed was much faster than his fire-extinguishing speed, so it was useless. The second was a shield type, which could only defend against flames from one side, not as good as Phaeton's materialized fireproof suit. Moreover, once the ability was used, he had to hold the skill hunter in his hand, and switching abilities was also very troublesome. So, Kurora decided to use only nin for defense, which, although consuming a lot, was the most suitable. In just 4 seconds, Kurora had already entered the flames and found the first sound source. Kurora guessed wrong, there was no recording device. The sound source was a stone with a knife mark on it, probably made by the chasing sound knife just now. There was a line of green letters on it, Rai. That's right, this was also one of the gains from Uvajin's body. John didn't keep the coins awarded for defeating Uvajin, he just used them all in a wave of draws. 4 useless item cards, 1 item card opened a fragment of the Kira arrow, 1 stand card Magician's Red, 1 skill card, which was the ripple-cutting knife John just used, and 1 stand card, the ability John just used also came from this stand card. Stand name, Echoes Act Point 1. Destructive Power, E. Persistence, B. Precision, C. Growth Potential, A. It can materialize sound and can hit the opponent by directly punching or throwing the sound onto them. It can also achieve the echo effect by writing on the surface of objects. John is now using this special effect. Echoes is the stand of Koichi Hirose, the true protagonist of Jojo Part 4, and has the ability to evolve autonomously. It is also one of the few stands in Jojo that can evolve on its own without relying on other things. Before Echoes evolved to ACT3, it basically had no combat power, but John just wanted to use this ability to mislead Kurora. Kurora understood John's intention. He didn't want to waste any more time and ran directly in the direction of the old man. Kurora had already remembered the old man's position when he was outside the flames just now. In fact, this was what Kurora had been avoiding all along. He also knew that he could definitely wait for John next to the old man, but he didn't dare to gamble. He was afraid that John would discover him from a distance and run away directly. Of course, this wasn't the main reason. The most important thing was that this old man was no pushover either. An old man who completely relied on hard strength and skill to make Phaeton suffer. Kurora didn't dare to underestimate him at all. If John relied on strange and bizarre special abilities, then the old man relied on years of practice and combat experience to fight until now. He didn't run directly next to the old man just now because he was afraid that John and the old man would join forces. That old man was indeed not to be underestimated. Kurora was even hesitant about whether to go or not. However, he immediately made up his mind to go because he really wanted John's ability too much. To put it another way, he was confident that even if the two of them joined forces, he would be able to escape. Kurora rushed over directly. John was using echoes to write everywhere, interfering with the troop. He didn't know that the members of the troop had already retreated. He was afraid that the entire troop would attack together, so he could only rely on these interferences to prevent them from finding him all at once. Going to find the old man was also a roundabout advance, not daring to make the purpose too obvious. Just as John, who had finished placing the echo's words on one side, was preparing to run out of the circle of flames, he suddenly saw a black shadow appear in the flames. Of course, Kurora also discovered John in front of him. Neither side spouted any trash talk, and they directly fought together. Kurora discovered John first, but Crimson King, with its A in both power and speed, was far stronger than Kurora in close combat. In a brief confrontation, Kurora's arm was directly dislocated. Kurora immediately jumped away, grabbed the dislocated arm with his other hand, and twisted it. With a crack, his arm was fine. John was MMP, what did this mean? How come everyone except me knows this move? Didn't you say this move was rare? Kurora was observing John, and John was also observing Kurora. John's hand had already grabbed the tinfoil in his pocket, and he was very vigilantly looking around. Why haven't the other members of the troop come yet? No, Kurora didn't send any signals, nor did he shout loudly for people to gang up on me. In John's understanding, Kurora was definitely not a reckless man like Jojo and Phaeton who liked one-on-one battles. He was definitely a normal person like John who would gang up if he could. Could it be that only he came, or were other people preparing to ambush him from the side? John's brain was running wildly, and then, John gave up thinking. What's the point of thinking so much? Silently opened Epitaph. Well, no one ambushed him after 7 seconds, it seems that no one is around now. Chapter 106. John immediately summoned Magician's Red, making the flames between John and Kurora smaller. Although John, with Magician's Red, had an advantage fighting in the flames, he still couldn't avoid impaired vision. John didn't know how many abilities were recorded in Kurora's skill hunter, and he had no idea what kind of abilities he possessed. First, let's analyze Kurora's information. As the leader of the Phantom Troop, the brain of the spider, Kurora has extremely high intelligence and a calm, cautious attitude. That is to say, he is confident in defeating John, who has already eliminated 3 members. Where does his confidence come from? John didn't know. Kurora's combat skills are also impeccable. He was able to withstand the siege of Silva Zaldik and Xeno Zaldik for so long, so his hand-to-hand combat skills are very strong. However, when he exchanged punches with Crimson King just now, his power should be inferior to Crimson King's, but it cannot be ruled out that he was trying to lure himself in. No matter how you look at it, Kurora can be regarded as the existence in the troop that John is most unwilling to face. John's information advantage has vanished. The only thing worth rejoicing about is that he probably understands Kurora's ability. The activation conditions for Skill Hunter are too harsh, and Kurora has no chance to steal John's ability. Moreover, stands are produced by the system and are not part of the NAN ability system, so it's debatable whether they can be stolen. John looked at Kurora, who was holding Skill Hunter in one hand, with a headache. The epitaph didn't predict the ability he would use. However, Kurora must hold Skill Hunter in one hand when using his abilities, and he can only use one ability at a time, which can be exploited. Kurora didn't have much time to observe. He didn't know when John's reinforcements to encircle the troop would arrive, and staying in the flames for even a second would cause a huge drain on his nin. Quick battle and quick resolution, Kurora immediately rushed up. The book with the blood-colored handprint in his hand moved automatically without wind, and began to flip pages quickly. I've always felt it was very strange before, it seems that we have all lost a period of time's memory. Based on my judgment, this is your ability, right? That feeling is like a period of time being shaved off, it should be the real thing about your teleportation. And your ability to disappear instantly and your ability to be immune to attacks must be related to those knives. I'm right, John. Kurora exposed John's most confidential abilities while rushing up. Of course, this was not just to show off. He was also testing John. If this ability was indeed as he thought, then John would definitely react. If not, Kurora would turn around and run. Of course, these can also interfere with John, making John's mentality imperfect. Once the trump card is exposed, the opponent's heart will inevitably panic instinctively, which is what Kurora hopes to see. John was indeed surprised. He didn't expect Kurora to investigate his name so thoroughly and even guess the ability of Crimson King. Although he had guessed that this day would come sooner or later, he didn't expect it to come so quickly. Although he doesn't know what the restrictions are, he will definitely be able to obtain it after capturing him. With this in mind, Kurora rushed up. And John also woke up from his brief daze. Whether it's Crimson King or Silver Chariot, their reactions are very fast, and it's not realistic to rely on sneak attacks. Crimson King punched Kurora back, without continuing to attack. At the same time, the skill hunter in Kurora's hand also stopped flipping, stopping on a certain page of the book. Suddenly, a sword appeared in Kurora's hand, with a grey-white eye on the hilt. A sense of solemn killing and death came from the sword. This sword is not long, probably only 60 centimeters, and the style of the sword is also very strange, with some strange characters carved on it that John couldn't understand. That sword seems to be a living thing, observing John through the eyes on the hilt, making John feel a chill. This sword also has a kind of indescribable antiquity. This sword is very dangerous, and you must not be cut by this sword, John is sure of this. Inferno Wheel, Inferno Chain. Fortunately, he extracted Magician's Red before, so he doesn't lack long-range attack methods. Magician's Red's destructive power is indeed far more powerful than Emperor. John turned a head-high ball of fire into various shapes and threw it out. Although John's last name is not Joestar, his first name has a Jo in it, so the Joestar family's traditional skills are still very proficient. John didn't hesitate and turned around and flew away. As expected, that sword looks terrifying no matter how you look at it. John, who doesn't have the world over heaven yet, doesn't dare to try. I'm afraid that if you try it, you will die. As the saying goes, you can beat Haman, but you can't beat running away. Running away is also an important part of the Golden Spirit, inherited from Joseph's Golden Spirit-filled skills. John has also relied on this trick to resolve many life and death crises. John has long passed the age of being a reckless youth, and he is not a stupid person who only knows how to be reckless. There is no illusion in life that I can make a comeback. John has already passed the period of confusion when he first transmigrated. He has his own judgment, and being cautious is the key. The reason why he dared to kill Yuvajin and Phaeton was because he was familiar with their abilities and confident in his own abilities. In fact, in his previous life, John still liked the Phantom Troop very much and thought they were very handsome, but when they stand in front of you and want to kill you, those thoughts are gone, and all you can do is kill them. John couldn't help but secretly complain that he originally wanted to inherit the Golden Spirit, but how is he getting closer and closer to the Dark Will? However, killing anti-human elements that are harmful to oneself seems to be a part of the Golden Spirit. John thought absently, Magician's Red's flames did cause a little trouble for Kurora. But at most, it's just a little bit. Kurora held the book in one hand and the sword in the other. The sword slashed on the flames without the slightest hindrance, and the flames turned into sparks and dissipated the moment they touched the sword. Seeing John's terrified look, he secretly rejoiced that he had made the right decision. This can't go on. John's leg strength is not as good as Kurora's, so he will definitely be caught up. Crimson King, erase the next time. Anyway, it has already been exposed, so John no longer hides it and openly activated Crimson King. Chapter 107. Rai. Kurora had absolutely no idea why John would make such a sound, exposing his position. However, after seeing the miserable states of Phaeton, Finks and Yuvajin, Kurora faced John with all his strength, daring not to slack off. Kurora's strength and speed couldn't compare to those of the troop's frontline fighters, but he possessed a caution and combat intelligence that they lacked. Could it be that he had other undiscovered abilities? Kurora frowned, summoning a throwing knife from Bandit's secret. It was called the chasing/bat knife, capable of targeting and locking onto an object that emitted sound, launching an attack. Once locked on, it would be an endless pursuit, either destroying the sound source or the knife itself. Originally, it was the ability of a hunter who specialized in capturing Garen bats. Garen bats were extremely fast, small, and agile, making them very difficult to catch. To capture these bats, the hunter developed this ability, but Kurora had stolen it. The only drawback was that it could only track sound, and its power was very weak. With a ding, the throwing knife seemed to hit something. But John's laughter didn't stop, in fact, it increased. That's right, many more places emitted the same laughter, and the sound didn't change at all. The throwing knife didn't track or break, and of course, Kurora wouldn't naively think that John had been taken down, that was just wishful thinking. It seems it's just something like a tape recorder used for interference. This relieved Kurora slightly, he was still afraid that John had other abilities. However, the situation was urgent, and he didn't know when the enemy would come. Fortunately, he had already had the wounded retreat. If John's ability was really as he guessed, then it was worth taking a gamble. Kurora chose a sound source and ran towards it. Of course, he wasn't expecting to find John in the flames right away, but just hoping for some clues. Kurora's entire body surged with nin, forming a thick membrane on his skin. Kurora did have some fire-resistant abilities in Bandit's secret, but none of them were suitable for the current situation. Kurora had two types of fire-extinguishing abilities, one was a fire-extinguishing style, but Magician's Red's fire starting speed was much faster than his fire-extinguishing speed, so it was useless. The second was a shield style, which could only defend against flames from one side, not as good as Phaeton's materialized fireproof suit. Moreover, once he used the ability, he had to hold Bandit's secret in his hand, making it very troublesome to switch abilities. So, Kurora decided to only use Nin for defense, which, although consuming a lot of energy, was the most suitable. In just 4 seconds, Kurora had entered the flames and found the first sound source. Kurora guessed wrong, there was no tape recorder. The sound source was a stone with a knife mark on it, probably from the chasing sound knife just now. There was a line of small green characters on it, Rai. That's right, this was also one of the gains from Uvajan, the gold coins awarded for defeating Uvajan. John didn't keep much and immediately spent them all on a lottery draw. 4 useless item cards, 1 item card revealed a fragment of the Kira arrow, 1 stand card Magician's Red, 1 skill card, which was the ripple cutter that John just used, and 1 stand card, the ability John just used also came from this stand card. Stand name, Echoes Act. 1. Destructive power, E. Speed, E. Range, B. It can also achieve an echo effect by writing on the surface of objects, which is the special effect that John is currently using. Echoes is the stand of Koichi Hirose, the true protagonist of Jojo Part 4, and has the ability to evolve on its own. It is also one of the few stands in Jojo that can evolve on its own without relying on other things. Before Echoes evolved to ACT3, it basically had no combat power, but John wanted to use this ability to mislead Kurora. Kurora understood John's intention, he didn't want to waste any more time and ran directly towards the old man's location. Kurora had already remembered the old man's position when he was outside the flames. In fact, this was what Kurora had been avoiding all along. He also knew that he could definitely wait for John next to the old man, but he didn't dare to gamble. He was afraid that John would discover him from a distance and run away. Of course, this wasn't the main reason, the most important thing was that the old man was no pushover either. An old man who made Phaeton suffer with pure strength and skill, Kurora didn't dare to underestimate him at all. If John relied on strange and bizarre special abilities, then the old man had been fighting until now with the skills and combat experience he had cultivated for many years. He didn't run directly next to the old man just now because he was afraid that John and the old man would join forces. That old man was definitely not to be underestimated. Kurora was even hesitant about whether to go or not. However, he immediately made up his mind to go because he really wanted John's ability too much. To put it another way, he was confident that even if the two of them joined forces, he would be able to escape. Kurora rushed over directly. John was using echoes to write words everywhere, interfering with the troop. He didn't know yet that the members of the troop had retreated. He was afraid that the entire troop would come at him together, so he could only rely on these interferences to prevent them from finding him all at once. Going to find the old man was also a roundabout advance, not daring to make the purpose too obvious. Just as John, who had finished placing the echo's words on one side, was preparing to run out of the circle of flames, he suddenly saw a dark figure appear in the flames. Of course, Kurora also discovered John in front of him. Neither side said any trash talk and directly engaged in a battle. Kurora discovered John first, but Crimson King, with its power and speed both at A, was far stronger than Kurora in close combat. In the brief confrontation, Kurora's arm was directly dislocated. Kurora immediately jumped back a distance, grabbed the dislocated arm with his other hand, and twisted it. With a crack, the arm was fine. John was speechless. What does this mean? Why does it seem like everyone except me knows this trick? Didn't they say this trick is rare? Kurora was observing John, and John was also observing Kurora. John's hand had already grabbed the tinfoil in his pocket, watching the surroundings very vigilantly. Why haven't the other members of the troop come yet? No, Kurora didn't send any signals or shout loudly for people to come and gang up on me. In John's understanding, Kurora was definitely not a reckless fool like Yovijin and Phaeton who liked one-on-one fights. He was definitely a normal person like John who would never single out if he could gang up. Could it be that only he came, or are others preparing to ambush him from the side? John's brain was running wildly, and then, John gave up thinking. Why bother thinking so much? Silently opened Epitaph. No one ambushed him after 7 seconds, it seems like there's no one around now. Chapter 108. John immediately summoned Magician's Red, reducing the flames between John and Kurora a little. Although John, with Magician's Red, had an advantage in fighting in the flames, he still couldn't avoid impaired vision. John didn't know how many abilities were recorded in Kurora's skill hunter, and John had no idea what abilities he had. First, let's analyze Kurora's information. As the leader of the Phantom Troop, the brain of the spider, Kurora possesses extremely high intelligence and a calm and cautious attitude, meaning he is confident in defeating John, who has already eliminated 3 members. Where does his confidence come from? John didn't know. Kurora's combat skills are also impeccable. He was able to withstand the siege of Silva Zaldik and Xeno Zaldik for so long, meaning his physical skills are very strong. However, when he exchanged blows with Crimson King just now, his strength should be inferior to Crimson King's, but it cannot be ruled out that he was trying to lure me into a trap. No matter how you look at it, Kurora is the one in the troop that John least wants to face. John's information advantage has vanished. The only thing worth rejoicing about is that he probably understands Kurora's ability. The activation conditions for Skill Hunter are too harsh, and Kurora has no chance to steal John's ability. Moreover, stands are products of the system and are not within an ability system, so it's debatable whether they can be stolen. John looked at Kurora, who was holding Skill Hunter in one hand, with a headache. The epitaph just now didn't predict the ability he would use. However, Kurora must hold Skill Hunter in one hand when using an ability, and he can only use one ability at a time, which can be exploited. Kurora doesn't have much time to observe. He doesn't know when John's reinforcements to encircle the troop will arrive, and every second spent in the flames consumes a huge amount of nin. Quick battle, quick resolution. Kurora immediately rushed up, and the book with blood-colored handprints in his hand moved automatically without wind, and began to flip pages quickly. I've always felt very strange before, it seems that we all lost a period of time's memory. According to my judgment, this is your ability, right? That feeling is like a period of time being cut off, it should be the truth about your teleportation. Also, your ability to disappear instantly and your ability to be immune to attacks must be related to those throwing knives, right? Am I right, John? Kurora exposed John's most confidential abilities while rushing up. Of course, this is not just for show. He is also testing John. If this ability is really what he thinks, then John will definitely react. If not, Kurora will turn around and run. Of course, these can also interfere with John, making John's mentality imperfect. Once the trump card is exposed, the opponent's heart will instinctively panic, which is what Kurora hopes to see. John was indeed surprised. He didn't expect Kurora to investigate his name so thoroughly and even guess the ability of Crimson King. Although he had guessed that this day would come sooner or later, he didn't expect it to come so quickly. He also guessed that the throwing knives were related to his ability, which means he would never let John get close to the throwing knives. But once he uses foil to transfer with man in the mirror, his ability will definitely be guessed instantly, and there is no gap to use man in the mirror. Seeing John's surprised reaction, Kurora felt that he had bet right. He was convinced that such a terrifying ability like John's must have many restrictions like his skill hunter. Although he doesn't know what the restrictions are, he will definitely be able to get his hands on them after capturing him. With this thought in mind, Kurora rushed up. And John also woke up from the brief daze. Whether it is Crimson King or Silver Chariot, their reactions are very fast, and it is not realistic to rely on sneak attacks. Crimson King forced Kurora back with a punch, without continuing to attack. At the same time, Skill Hunter in Kurora's hand also stopped flipping, stopping on a certain page of the book. Suddenly a sword appeared in Kurora's hand, with a greyish-white eye on the hilt. A kind of suashat and deathly aura came from the sword. This sword is not long, only about 60 centimeters. The style of the sword is also very strange, with some strange characters carved on it that John can't understand. That sword seemed to be alive, observing John through the eyes on the hilt, giving John a chill. This sword also has a kind of indescribable ancient feeling. This sword is very dangerous, and John is certain that he must not be cut by this sword. Inferno Wheel, Inferno Chain. Fortunately, he drew Magician's Red before, so he doesn't lack long-range attack methods. The destructive power of Magician's Red is indeed much more powerful than Emperor. John turned the man-high fireballs into various shapes and threw them out. Although John's last name is not Joestar, his name does have a Jo in it, so the traditional Joestar family skills are still very proficient. John didn't hesitate and turned around and left quickly. As expected, that sword looks terrifying no matter how you look at it. John doesn't dare to try without the world over heaven. I'm afraid that if I try, I will die. As the saying goes, you can beat Ripple, but you can't beat running away. Running away is also an important part of the Golden Spirit, a skill inherited from Joseph full of the Golden Spirit. John has also relied on this trick to resolve many life and death crises. John has long passed the age of being a reckless youth, and he is not just an iron-headed fool who only knows how to be reckless. There is no such thing as the illusion of being able to counter-kill. However, killing anti-human elements that are harmful to oneself seems to be a part of the Golden Spirit. John thought absently, the flames of Magician's Red did cause a little trouble for Kurora. But at most, it's only a little bit. Kurora held the book in one hand and the sword in the other. The sword slashed at the flames without any resistance. The flames turned into sparks and dissipated the moment they touched the sword. Seeing John fleeing in terror, he secretly rejoiced that he had made the right decision. This can't go on. John's leg strength is not as good as Kurora's, so he will definitely be caught up. Crimson King, erase the following time. Anyway, it has already been exposed, so John no longer hides it and openly activated Crimson King. Chapter 109. As the Crimson King erased time again, everything around turned grey once more. I certainly can't outrun you, but if I erase time and run with you, what can you do to me? The distance between Kurora and John instantly widened, and Magician's Red kept releasing flame chains during John's escape. Even if Kurora wanted to get rid of them, it would definitely take some time. Kurora looked at the pocket watch in his hand, silently. The sword that was originally in his hand disappeared. Kurora suppressed his excited mood. As expected, John's ability was as he had guessed. Moreover, he had roughly calculated the duration of John's ability through the pocket watch just now, about only 7.5 seconds. If it was 2 minutes, Kurora would have run away directly. Kurora's left hand started flipping through the bandit's secret again, and then chased after John. MMP, relying on feelings is completely unreliable, and it wasted my escape time. But now Kurora doesn't have anything in his hand, and the page turning hasn't stopped. It seems Kurora hasn't chosen what ability to use to attack John. Now can be said to be Kurora's weakest time. If I use Crimson King to get behind Kurora now, there is a great chance to severely injure or even kill Kurora. John immediately activated Crimson King's epitaph to do a divination. Then John saw Kurora holding the magic sword inlaid with eyes and slashing it on Silver Chariot's blade. John had an MMP, he had to say in his heart. I actually had the idea that I could counter-kill just now, as expected. I was just thinking too much. Kurora who has figured out the ability is not someone I can counter-kill. Looking at Kurora's still flipping bandit's secret, he twitched the corner of his mouth. He really can pretend, if I hadn't been so witty and used epitaph to take a look first, I would have really fallen into this old schemer's hands. Kurora doesn't show any intention on the surface, you can't tell at all that he has sinister intentions to ambush John. Oscar owes you a little golden man, Kurora always has a poker face, you can't see any psychological fluctuations. RBQ, can't afford to provoke, RBQ, can't afford to provoke. John, haven't you noticed yet? Discovered what? John looked dazed, what should I have discovered? No need to pretend, the throwing knives you threw just now are all nearby, you've been guiding me here all along, right? John looked at Kurora in shock, these throwing knives were just tools for escape. But now they are temporarily useless, but how did Kurora see through it? Could it be that the abilities of the Mirror Man have been seen through? John couldn't help but tightly grasp the tinfoil in his pocket, preparing to escape immediately if anything went wrong. Speaking of which, how did he see through the ability of the Mirror Man? When I used the Mirror Man, I used Crimson King to erase the time, theoretically they shouldn't be able to feel it. But it's hard to say, maybe Kurora's bandit's secret has collected the ability to directly peek at the opponent's Nin ability. After all, John's pseudonym and Crimson King's ability were completely seen through by Kurora just now. Humph, so what? All the throwing knives you threw here have been destroyed by me, you have no way to use these throwing knives to use your ability. Hearing these words, John's heart skipped a beat, in this way, there is no way to directly pull the old man into the mirror world. The tinfoil is only in his pocket, it can only transfer John himself, and the old man who is not illuminated by the tinfoil's reflection has no way to transfer through the tinfoil. Could it be that he has to take out the tinfoil is too dangerous outside. The tinfoil will be easily damaged at this level, the aftermath of an user's battle can instantly tear the tinfoil. John fell into a dilemma, whether to risk saving the old man, after all, he is just a stranger he only met once. John, your time jump is simply invincible, but the world is fair, such a strong ability must have limitations. Your ability activation should be based on these throwing knives as a medium, right? You shouldn't be able to attack people when your ability is activated, right? John was shocked and the fluke in his heart disappeared, he didn't expect this to be discovered. John looked at Kurora with deep fear. Such a trick must have a lot of consumption, right? How many times can you use such a trick? Sneak attack is your only way out, don't worry, I won't kill you. Kurora continued to say. John's face was as usual, and his Nin aura didn't fluctuate much. But Kurora knew that it was all his pretense, John should be depleting his life force. Thinking of this, Kurora silently curled the corner of his mouth in his heart. I won't let you die for this ability, Kurora added silently in his heart. Kurora's bandit's secret stealing ability also has a condition, if the ability user himself dies, then the ability in the bandit's secret will also disappear. So for John's ability, Kurora will not let John die. Of course, Kurora's words also have a deeper meaning, John will definitely be confused when he hears this kind of suggestion in despair. John suddenly breathed a sigh of relief, Kurora's analysis was wrong. It seems that these should not be seen by his ability, just now was just his guess. In fact, John was scared by Kurora's aura just now, and was caught off guard. On second thought, how could Kurora know John's ability? John's abilities are all given by the system, can his Nin ability see through the system? At most, he feels it more like Butcherity and tested it out. He may not even think of the existence of the system until he dies, how could a native of the hunter world fully understand stand abilities? He at most regards it as Nin ability, this is Kurora's experience limiting his thinking. In the hunter world, such a bug ability must have many restrictions in Kurora's eyes, but the system is different. These things that seem to cost a lot in the hunter world are just like that in the Jojo world. But John's train of thought was interrupted, now there is no time to think. A golden light came from the sky, passing through the firewall and smashing in the middle of John and Kurora. That was an Nin bullet. John and Kurora's minds were on each other just now and they didn't notice. John rolled over and ran out of the fire circle covered by flames. Who is it? Both John and Kurora had this question in their hearts. Could it be other members of the troupe? Who is it? In John's memory, no one in the troupe uses this kind of trick, could it be those two unlucky ghosts who will die in 2 years? Kurora was also guessing, it seems that the support force for this operation has arrived. At this moment, John suddenly realized the position of the person who threw the Nin bullet just now. A black-armed helicopter hovered above the fire circle. The sound of the rotor blades tearing through the air finally overwhelmed the crackling sound of the fire burning. John saw the person standing on the helicopter cabin door with the powerful vision brought by his stand. How could it be him? Chapter 110. The person on the plane was undoubtedly Jing Freaks, the man who supported the protagonist through more than 140 episodes. Jing Freaks is the father of the protagonist, Gon, and also the goal that Gon has been pursuing. Jing himself is also one of the world's top Nen users, one of the 5 great Nen users. A relic hunter, the boar of the zodiac. Why would he be here? Could it be that this relic has attracted his attention? That's the only explanation. It seems he underestimated this relic, even a big shot of this level has been lured out. But it's no wonder, after all, the value of this relic has attracted even the Phantom Troop, who have very high standards. Jing on the plane glanced at John with curiosity and surprise, then immediately shifted his gaze because Krollo had also left the Ring of Fire. So, the sense of crisis just now came from Jing? John relaxed immediately. Krollo is strong, but Jing is stronger. John doesn't think he can beat Jing. After breaking away from the Ring of Fire, Krollo immediately adjusted his posture and looked towards Jing. However, he was clearly surprised to see Jing. The noise of the helicopter was too loud to be concealed. Such a large helicopter was simply a sitting duck. Of course, Jing wasn't afraid of Krollo's attack, but the pilot on the helicopter couldn't withstand it. Jing didn't dare to stay any longer and immediately jumped off the plane, telling the pilot to leave immediately. Of course, Krollo wouldn't just watch Jing fall like that, in the air, without a place to borrow strength. Jing, falling from a high altitude, could be said to have his defenses wide open, with only 10% of his strength remaining. In an instant, several blade-like Nen bullets flew from Krollo's hand, targeting Jing in the air. However, Jing was also prepared for this. He had countermeasures, but he dissipated the Nen energy he had just gathered in his hand. Because John had already made a move, Magician's Red burst out of his body. John's face darkened. Magician's Red did look like a turkey, but what time was it? They were still fighting. Be serious, damn it. And what turkey, man? That sounds terrible. But speaking of which, Magician's Red is indeed a turkey man, a bird-headed humanoid figure, surrounded by flames, living up to the name Turkey Man. John flattened his left hand and placed his right fist on top of it. Magician's Red also fully swung his arm. The Ring of Fire in front of John rose several feet in an instant, forming a wall of fire to block Krollo's Nen bullets. After releasing the Nen bullets, Krollo immediately rushed towards John. Just now, because of the obstruction of the flames, John didn't notice Krollo immediately. However, John barely managed to summon Crimson King to meet the attack. A Nen bullet immediately attacked from behind John, grazed John's face, and flew directly towards Krollo's face. Krollo had no choice but to change his posture, abandoning his attack on John and crossing his hands to block his face. With a bang, Krollo was blown away by the impact of the Nen bullet explosion. John was also affected by the explosion, but the impact was small and not as severe as Krollo's. Krollo looked at Jing, who had successfully landed behind John, with a gloomy expression. He never wanted to fight Jing, no matter how strong Jing's ability was. He had no intention of stealing it. He couldn't win, even if the entire troop went up together. Jing could take down 2 or 3 of them. Now, with only Krollo alone, and having consumed a lot of Nen to resist Magician's Red's flames, he really didn't have much confidence against a Jing in full condition. His actions just now were to distract Jing and then take down John by surprise, using John's life as a bargaining chip to threaten Jing and then escape. He didn't expect Jing to act so quickly. Although Krollo was in a difficult situation now, he wasn't flustered. Although Jing was stronger than him, he wasn't that easy to kill. As long as Krollo was determined to run, Jing would likely be unable to stop him, and Krollo's teammates, the other members of the troop, hadn't gone far. Suddenly, an explosion came from the distant forest. Although Krollo's expression didn't change, the light in his eyes faltered. That was the direction he had just told the troop members to escape. It seemed that things had exceeded his expectations. However, Krollo quickly calmed down. He still had confidence in the troop's strength. Even if the troop had so many burdens, each member of the troop was a force to be reckoned with. It seems like a fight has broken out. You should know the strength of our troop, right? Your little companions are enough for our troop to kill several times over. Why don't we each take a step back? You don't help this kid and hand him over to me, and I won't stop you from saving your companions. If you disagree, I'll pester you and let your companions die because they can't get your help. So, make a choice, help this stranger you've only met once, or your good friends who came with you. You are strong, I can't beat you. But can you kill me in such a short time? Krollo looked expressionless and spoke in a calm tone, but every word hit the nail on the head. Jing touched his messy hair under his blue striped hat, his face showing uncontrollable distress. Jing also put away his usual carefree appearance and looked at Krollo with a serious expression. John retreated a few steps imperceptibly. Indeed, I can't kill you in a short time. However, you seem to have misunderstood one thing. Jing's expression slowly changed, turning into a mischievous, amused look. Krollo felt a chill in his heart. Jing said teasingly, "That's really sorry. I couldn't help but cooperate with your performance just now." Jing put his hands in his pockets. "You've misunderstood one thing, my teammates have never been weaklings. He went alone to stop your troop members. If you can really kill him, then try it, although I don't think you'll succeed. That's Badabai Gigante." Krollo clearly knew Badabai's power, and his expression changed. Badabai is far less troublesome than Jing Freaks, but Badabai's strength is no weaker than Jing's, only slightly inferior in control and intelligence. If the entire troop was intact, then at the cost of a little sacrifice, killing 1 or 2 people could completely take down Badabai. But the current troop is not what it used to be. Yuvajin is near death, and Phaeton and Finks are seriously injured. The close-range combatants in the troop are basically useless. Bonolinov is countered by Badabai, and Nobunaga has difficulty dealing effective damage to Badabai. Krollo wanted to retreat slowly, but found that his feet seemed to be stuck to the ground and couldn't move. This familiar ability, that's right, Nobunaga had just described it, it was one of John's many abilities. Seeing that the flames couldn't trap Krollo, he immediately switched Magician's Red back to Craftsman. However, John's Craftsman couldn't be too far from Krollo, otherwise, it wouldn't be able to hold him in place. Krollo's Skill Hunter stopped flipping, and Krollo's left hand emitted a strange light. John's epitaph predicted that the next attack would be ineffective, so he simply stopped using Time Erase to dodge the attack and directly used Hardening to brute force it. Chapter 111. But something beyond John's expectations happened. The moment Krollo released the Nen orb, John felt a sense of discomfort, and he regretted his actions. Jing had already dodged it. Fortunately, the orb wasn't fast, he could escape even without time erasure. A phantom of the Scarlet King's foot appeared on John's foot, or rather, the Scarlet King's foot completely enveloped John's foot. This was a way to apply the Stand's power to oneself. Stand users might have strength far exceeding ordinary people, or possess bizarre abilities, but they had a fatal flaw: the Stand user themselves. Stands moved very fast, but Stand users did not, which further limited the Stand's abilities. But this move perfectly solved the problem of the Stand user's lack of speed. Dio used this move to catch up with the 2 Spider-Men, Hierophant Green and Hermit Purple, back then. With this move, John's escape speed also improved significantly. It was exactly as the epitaph predicted, without the slightest deviation. John prepared to jump further away, and a voice seemed to be calling him to run fast, but an accident happened. A blinding light came from behind Krollo. It was a sun about 20 meters in diameter. John was momentarily blinded by the dazzling light and stunned. What was this? It was as shocking as watching a big explosion up close. A question followed: why? This should be Phaeton's pain packer. But John clearly remembered that he should have killed Phaeton. Moreover, that little sun was at least 7 or 8 kilometers away from John, and he couldn't guess what had happened. Why was Phaeton resurrected? Could it be a control-type ability? John's thoughts wandered. Not only John, but even Jing was stunned for a moment, but only for a moment. The next instant, Jing reacted and threw an bullet at Krollo. Krollo seemed to know what had happened, but he didn't show any surprise or daze, as if everything was within his plan. John felt dizzy, and cursed inwardly, completely unaware of what was happening. Hadn't he dodged it just now? Even after seeing John fall, Krollo didn't attack. He turned and fled for his life because he clearly felt a terrifying Nen aura coming from Jing. Krollo didn't have the confidence to snatch the fallen John from Jing's hands, so he chose to be cautious. Krollo's accidental ability happened to counter John's epitaph. The epitaph's predictions had a time limit, an attack succeeding this time could not be predicted. It was also John's fault for being too arrogant. 6 kilometers away from the battlefield where John was, 3 minutes ago. Jing, I'll go stop them first, you go see if anyone there needs rescue." A burly man in red said this to Jing with his back turned, and without waiting for Jing's reply, jumped straight down from the flying plane. At the same time, on the ground, the troop members were rushing towards the town in a flurry. A chill assaulted the entire troop, and everyone suddenly stopped as if they had agreed beforehand. Except for the few who had lost their fighting ability, almost all the normal members of the troop looked up at the sky. A red figure fell rapidly from the sky, without any landing measures, almost like Stephen Chow's final descent from the sky in Kung Fu, except that Badabai, because of his powerful Ren, only had his clothes flapping in the wind without burning or being naked. With a bang, Badabai crashed down. No one dared to step forward, and a fear called death swept over everyone present. The sharp-eyed Maki immediately recognized the person, someone they couldn't beat. "Run! It's Zodiac Badabai Gigante." Indeed, some people didn't know Badabai, but they did feel the fear from the terrifying Nen aura on Badabai's body. Moreover, Badabai was very famous in the world as a terrorist hunter, and the troop, as leaders of terrorists, knew something about Badabai. This was a daddy they couldn't beat. Everyone tacitly agreed to flee. What a joke to fight head-on. It was impossible to fight head-on, they weren't brain-damaged. The strongest of the troop were basically crippled. Only a few people in the troop could match Badabai for a few rounds, the leader, Phaeton, Yuvajin, Finks and Shulnark who stuck antennas into himself. The others would basically die instantly. "Franklin, Maki, you go first, I'll catch up later." A person resembling a mummy wearing red boxing gloves turned and ran towards Badabai after saying this. "Bonolinov. He's very dangerous, come back." "It's okay, Franklin, if no one takes action, none of us can escape, and I don't think my Jupiter will lose to this bastard. Bonolinov, be careful." Seeing Bonolinov's resolve, they didn't act pretentious and didn't waste the precious time Bonolinov had bought, immediately leaving with the wounded. Bonolinov stood quietly waiting for Badabai. He took off his bandages and began the traditional dance of his battle-loving tribe. Badabai didn't understand what he was trying to do, so he gave Bonolinov a chop to the neck. But only 5 seconds later, the confident Bonolinov fell down. His only thought before falling was why? Give me a chance to dance. Why? Where was the respect for the opponent that I promised myself? Because of Bonolinov's malicious feeding, Badabai's rating of the Phantom Troop dropped a lot. At the same time, Phaeton in Franklin's arms opened his eyes. Chapter 112. Just as Potter White was about to give chase, he suddenly sensed danger. Several black figures appeared behind Potter White. Without panicking, Potter White exerted force in his legs and placed his elbow horizontally in front of his chest, swinging it like a spinning top towards the people preparing to attack him from behind. The heads of those preparing to ambush Potter White split open like watermelons. Potter White is very tall, and the average person's height only reaches his chest. Too weak, Potter White thought. In that instant, an antenna shot out from Potter White's blind spot. However, Potter White had released a nearly meter-thick sphere of Nen around his body, and he detected the antenna the moment it entered the sphere. Although the antenna thrown by Shulnark was very fast and had cover, it still did not cause substantial damage to Potter White. Potter White had long reinforced his body with Nen, and Shulnark's puppet phone's antenna failed to pierce Potter White's flesh. Humph, 2 insignificant rats. Shulnark and an unknown manipulator from the troop had ambushed him here while escaping in different directions. Shulnark was covering the escape of the main group, and the other was trying to obtain Potter White as a powerful puppet. But now he regretted it. Watching Potter White gradually approaching, a tangible fear welled up within him, causing him to lose his in. If he had known, he wouldn't have bothered Potter White, that monster. Potter White deeply regretted it. Although he had heard of Potter White's strength, without a reference point, he had mistakenly thought he could win. If only I had made Yuvajin into a puppet. He was too greedy after all. Hindsight is always 20/20ths. He fled without any grace, driven by fear. But he was too slow. A beam of Nen shot towards him, and he jumped to barely dodge it. However, a fist the size of a casserole was already upon him. With a bang, he was completely knocked down, suffering a severe concussion. The bones in his face were almost completely shattered, and his brain was nearly spilling out. He was completely disfigured, and modern medical technology, aside from Nen removal, could not save his face. Potter White didn't stop and immediately went to chase Shulnark, who had already fled when he saw things were going badly. Shulnark's speed couldn't match Potter White's, and Potter White's Nan waves were very powerful, greatly interfering with Shulnark. Knowing he couldn't escape, Shulnark decided to make a desperate gamble, stabbing the Nan antenna of his puppet phone into his own body. Automatic operation mode, on. Shulnark's aura changed completely. His hair stood upright like a scion's, and golden flames erupted from his body. He was completely like a scion, said to be a special mode that Togashi created to pay homage to Dragon Ball. Shulnark's combat power also significantly increased in this state. Even Uvajin, the strongest in the troop in terms of physical ability, would have a headache facing Shulnark in this mode. At this moment, Shulnark had completely entered the Phantom Troop's first combat tier. No one in the troop could confidently kill him in this state. This move also surprised Potter White, who hadn't expected him to have such a technique. But that was all it was. Abilities that seemed very troublesome in the troop were just so-so in Potter White's eyes. Shulnark was completely wrong. Potter White's strength far exceeded Phaeton's and Uvajin's. Even in manual operation mode, he was forced into retreat by Potter White. Complete crushing in terms of Nan quantity, combat experience, physical ability, strength, and speed. This battle only lasted for 40 seconds, ending with Shulnark heavily injured and withdrawing from automatic mode in defeat. Maki, take Phaeton and leave first. I'll distract him. The good-natured Franklin also had an awakening. But a hand rested on Franklin's arm. Put me down, I can walk on my own now. What's the situation now? We encountered a terrifying enemy. The boss isn't here, so we split up to escape. Now we're being hunted down by Tatsumi Potter White Gigante. He's already killed Bonalinov and Shulnark. Where's the boss? The boss is at the ruins, dealing with that brat named John who just ambushed you on his own. Franklin answered Phaeton's question, but he still fled at his original speed. So that means this isn't the ruins anymore. Phaeton jumped down from Franklin's back. Don't be impulsive, Potter White is very strong, you can't beat him. The wound that John had inflicted on Phaeton's chest burst open due to the intense movement, and blood splattered onto his clothes. Don't push yourself. You bastard. Phaeton muttered in an unintelligible Meteor City dialect. So that means I can use Pain Packer here now. My anger is about to overflow, I must kill those bastards. Maki and Franklin stared blankly at Phaeton. It had to be said that the only one who could defeat Potter White now was Phaeton. Once Potter White was hit by his Pain Packer, he would either die or be severely injured. If Phaeton was in his peak condition, they wouldn't stop him, but now Phaeton was seriously injured, and they were not very reassured. What if he was instantly killed like Bonalinov just now? That would be very embarrassing. A terrifying and crazy smile cracked on Phaeton's lips. Franklin sighed, knowing that he couldn't persuade Phaeton anymore. He could only let him act recklessly, silently praying that Pain Packer could be successfully released. Phaeton turned around and attacked Potter White with his sword. Phaeton was indeed the Phantom Troop's first combat tier, leaving a bloody mark on Potter White's arm with his first strike. Potter White frowned. This black-clothed thief is faster than me, very troublesome. After 2 exchanges, Potter White had several more bloody marks on his body. Potter White also saw this and pressed closer, not giving him a chance to rest. But Phaeton's purpose had already been achieved. Pain Packer. Maki and Franklin, who had already run far away, felt the heat behind them and both lay down at the same time. Chapter 113. The small sun didn't last long, Phaeton's unforgivable naturally dissipated after only 6 seconds. Heavily injured, suffering from severe blood loss, and still engaged in intense combat, Phaeton finally lost consciousness and collapsed. Unforgivable was powerful, but it consumed too much Nan. Even a Phaeton in his prime wouldn't have been able to withstand it, let alone now, injured and with less than a third of his original strength. The sun's high temperature baked the ground red, melting some of the soil, and instantly turning other parts into crystals. The trees couldn't withstand the heat of over 6,000 degrees and were directly carbonized. No living creature within a 1-kilometer radius could have survived. For a full 2 minutes, no one dared to set foot in this area. 2 minutes later, a large hand burst out from the solidified earth. It was Badabai. The moment Phaeton donned his fire-resistant armor, Badabai sensed a deadly threat. Instinct honed from countless battles told him that he couldn't withstand the upcoming attack, he would die. And there was a feeling that he couldn't escape. Fully aware of the power of Unforgivable, Badabai decisively began digging. Although it was embarrassing, he couldn't afford to care about that in the face of a life-or-death crisis. Frankly, Badabai had rarely been this disheveled. He had never dug in the earth like this before. Although he didn't have much experience, his enhanced digging speed was still top-notch. Before Phaeton's Unforgivable fully erupted, Badabai had already dug a pit 5 meters deep. Unforgivable only melted a portion of the mud near the surface. Although Unforgivable was said to have a temperature of nearly 6,000 degrees, the actual temperature was far from that high. If it truly rivaled the sun, any opponent would be instantly vaporized. After a brief cooling period, Badabai climbed out of the dirt. He no longer possessed his initial composure, his clothes were scorched, and he looked quite disheveled. Panting heavily, Badabai saw the motionless Phaeton on the ground and fell silent. In Badabai's view, Phaeton used this move by overdrawing his life force, combined with a vow and restriction. After imposing simple restrictions on Phaeton, breaking his limbs, he continued to pursue the other troop members. However, Badabai no longer dared to underestimate the troop. Once they used a vow and restriction, they couldn't be judged by common sense, they could become as strong as possible. In Badabai's mind, the phantom troop had transformed from relatively weak, mindless thieves into thieves with awareness and the potential to pose a threat. Meanwhile, on the other battlefield, Kurora had already fled. Of course, he didn't run towards Phaeton's location but directly ran in the opposite direction. He knew that his chances of defeating Badabai were slim, and he might even be sandwiched by Jin. In such a situation, even Kurora couldn't escape. Logically, Kurora judged that running away directly was the most correct course of action. Jin noticed Kurora's intention, but he didn't pursue him. After quickly checking on John, Kurora had already run far away. Although it wasn't impossible to catch up, he was more worried about Badabai's safety than Kurora. After all, the fireball like the sun was still fresh in his memory. The unconscious John was being cared for by the old man, who had just recovered a bit of strength. However, John didn't remain unconscious for long and gradually woke up. Alert, John immediately jumped back a distance, and even after realizing it was the old man, he didn't relax his vigilance. After all, John's memory was still stuck at the moment he lost consciousness. He wasn't sure if what he was seeing was an illusion created by Kurora's ability. He immediately used the tinfoil in his pocket to run into the mirror world, then opened Crimson King Epitaph to predict the future. After confirming there was no danger, he slowly ran out of the mirror world. But now John wasn't of much use. The troop's affairs had already been fully taken over by Jin. Now that the troop was half crippled, they certainly wouldn't be Jin's opponents, so John could relax. However, John was still very concerned about Phaeton's unique technique, Unforgivable, which theoretically shouldn't exist. John suppressed the doubts in his heart and turned to ask the old man. I don't know anything. Young people these days are really amazing. Even a guy like you will one day surpass me and step onto the world stage. The old man lamented the passage of time and how his own strength had declined to this extent. What do you mean one day? I'm already in the center of the stage. It's too bad to say it directly, what an honest old man, but this is lovely on a beautiful girl, but on an old man, hee. I'm already stronger than you, okay? I defeated the opponent who gave you a hard time. John couldn't help but tease him. The old man chuckled, no, you're not good enough yet. Although I don't know how you defeated them, your strength and training are far from enough. If your goal is only to join the ranks of second-rate fighters, then never mind, I said it, you will suffer a big loss when you encounter first-rate Nin masters in the future, just like just now. I was just careless. The old man's eyes turned cold. If it weren't for a first-rate expert on the scene just now, your little life would have been gone long ago. Are you kidding me about being careless on the battlefield? John was speechless for a moment. Faced with the facts, John was indeed helpless. That guy just now, named Jin, is very strong. Reaching this point at this age can be said to be a once-in-a-century occurrence. It can be seen that his training is very good, his fundamentals are solid, and I saw his superb extension skills for the first time. Your little tricks might make him suffer a loss, but once your abilities are figured out, you might not even have a chance to escape. The old man saw through John's weaknesses at a glance. John's Nin cultivation was too low. Because of the convenience of his stand, John had done very little Nin training, far less than Killua and Gon, who had just experienced Bisky's training on Greed Island. His physical fitness was also insufficient, and his combat awareness was very poor. If it weren't for his stand's strong and comprehensive abilities, he would have been killed long ago. There is no doubt that stands also have limits, just as the Star Platinum, the stand with the upper limit of power, cannot beat Netero's 100 type Guanyin Bodhisattva. Although stand abilities are very special and convenient, every type has its advantages and disadvantages, and there are things John can learn from each of them. But John had previously focused almost all of his attention on training his stand. In fact, this is not John's fault, because stands provide a very fast and obvious boost to strength, but Nen abilities require slow and arduous training, and it is difficult to see results in a short time. The sound of explosions came again from the distant forest. Chapter 114. A slightly tipsy sea breeze caressed a handsome face. Still a seaside city, but this time a coastal port city. Unlike the tourist town from last time, this is a proper international metropolis, quite similar to the Shanghai of my previous life, though not quite as developed. A young man with a head of dazzling golden hair, exuding a mischievous aura, sat idly at the bar. This restaurant had just opened 3 days ago, and they hadn't even gotten around to changing the sign yet. The menu behind the counter was ready, but still no one came to eat. But that was all expected. It would be strange if the place was packed right now. Some ordinary home-style dishes were being sold at exorbitant prices, immediately deterring those who wandered in unknowingly. The few people he'd received in the morning had been lured in by the manager's charmingly devilish face, but they fled in disarray after seeing the menu. For that price, they could book a top-tier host at a host club for a whole week. They weren't fools. Opening such a large store in a prime location in the heart of a high-traffic district was a huge expense, but the high foot traffic should at least allow them to break even. However, this maverick shop became famous throughout the entire street in just one short day because of its handsome owner and its intimidating prices. This store used to be a clothing store, but a mysterious person bought the store at a price far higher than the market price. Combining it with the previous situation, they all guessed that this was the young master of a certain family who came out to experience life. John was playing with his phone, bored, waiting for the first discerning customer, sucker, to arrive. That's right, this blonde young man was John. A week had passed since the last battle. Of the many hunters Sach invited for the last troop raid, only 4 survived, including himself. The old man and Sach himself played dead to escape. Lindsay ran into Jing while running away, so he survived too, and finally John. During the troop raid, Pheton was seriously injured and captured, and Shulnark was also captured. Because of the hasty irregular extermination team, Franklin protected Maki and Finks with his body and was captured. The person who should have been eliminated by Hisoka and Baze were killed. Kurolo, Maki, Nobunaga, Finks, Kordopai and Pakunoda escaped, and Yovajan's fate was unknown. Originally, John was certain, but after Pheton's resurrection scam, he wasn't so sure anymore. The real ruins had been basically completely excavated 3 days ago, and the movable valuable cultural relics had basically been protected. John was also invited to visit these ancient ruins, and they were just average. Because John had already dropped out of school, he didn't know much about the history of this world and didn't understand the profound historical significance of this ruin. Jing also left a few days ago. This time it was just his friendly help, and he had other projects of his own. However, this time the harvest was still very fruitful. In addition to the Echo and Magician's Red rewarded after killing Yovajan, there were corresponding rewards for defeating Finks and Pheton later. After defeating the 2 of them, John was able to realize his dream of a 10 draw for the first time. In the game, you only need to recharge 10 yuan to achieve it, but now John can't recharge RMB. A total of 12 consecutive draws yielded a lot. Among them was Gnam, which can change appearance. This stand is also one of the few stands that does not have any attack power. You need to know that even Pearl Jam has attack power. However, not having attack power does not mean that this stand is trash. Although this stand is useless in the game, and like Pearl Jam, it is only developed to increase playability and enhance the fun of players' collection, it is unexpectedly useful in the hunter world. Because this stand is a functional stand, and its special abilities are very useful for the current John. Gnam is a stand attached to the surface of the user, which can freely change the user's appearance and voice to deceive the enemy's eyes, but it does not have any attack or defense power. Moreover, this stand cannot change height, weight, or clothing. But it is still a very practical stand, which means that John doesn't have to spend time learning disguise techniques, and can open a small account to do what he wants to do. That's right, John is using the face of young Dio right now. I have to say that Dio is indeed handsome. If Gnam couldn't fake height, he would have used the appearance of adult Dio directly. John successfully got rid of Lindsay with this ability, and entrusted him to the old man. He believed that his professionalism would definitely be better than John's half-baked skills. Teaching Lindsay was more than enough, and the old man agreed to teach Lindsay some basics because John had saved his life. Not only that, John also drew 2 other stands, both from the tarot card set. Stand name, Strength. Destructive Power, B. Speed, D. Growth, E. The original owner was a gorilla, and also the first animal stand user. The appearance of the Strength stand is like a cruise ship, which assimilates with the cruise ship and uses the deformed hull to oppress and restrain the opponent, and was finally defeated by Jojo's Iron Fist aura. This ability is very average, and the only value may be that you don't have to buy a boat ticket for going to sea in the future. Because of the size of this ability, John has never had a chance to use it. This stand is also visible to ordinary people. There is also a stand that makes John have to suspect that he is really not just Asian anymore. It seems that this crossing not only smuggled John to Europe, but also directly made him the European emperor. Stand name, Hanged Man. Destructive Power, C. Speed, A. Range, A. Precision, D. Persistence, B. Growth, D. The original owner was Jay Guile, a man with 2 right hands, Enya's son, Polnareff's nemesis, a pure villain, who died from Silver Chariot's stab. Although the person is not very good, the stand ability is unexpectedly outstanding. The appearance of the stand is humanoid, like a mummy wrapped in several layers of bandages. The ability is also related to mirrors, but the difference is that this stand has no way to pull people into the mirror world, but it can transfer attacks through the mirror surface, and can cause physical damage to the image in the mirror. It can transfer through a series of objects that can reflect light, such as standing water on the ground, mirrors, glass, and people's eyeballs, and the transfer speed directly in the mirror is close to the speed of light. This stand can be said to be one of the best assassination stands. Unless the attack speed reaches the speed of light, it is difficult to hurt the Hanged Man. Of course, you can also kill the stand user, but John, who owns Knom and the Mirror Man, is destined not to let people touch the main body. No one can directly attack the Hanged Man in the mirror. As long as you are not touched by those perverts, this ability is almost unsolvable. John is invincible again. However, these things are ultimately difficult to reach the Hall of Elegance. If you want to be among the first-class level in the Hunter world, you still have to train your Nen ability. After John simply tested the new stand, he honestly continued to practice Nen according to the Nen training method he had just asked Jing for. Chapter 115. Right now, John's shop is empty, he hasn't received a single order in a whole week. The people of the Hunter world aren't idiots, most of them still have the sense not to spend tens of thousands of dollars on a single meal. Besides, John's shop has no reputation whatsoever. If it were opened by a top-tier gourmet hunter, that price might be acceptable. But John has absolutely no fame in the culinary world or the gourmet hunter world, he's a complete newbie. John has finally realized his initial life plan, to open a restaurant and use the magical power of Pearl Jam to make a fortune. Although it's a bit different from his dream, it's still a good start. John has been very idle lately, cultivating Ripple in the morning and in the afternoon. John also wants to play on his phone and computer, but the conditions aren't right. The best phones are still flip phones, he doesn't even have a smartphone to mess around with. It's the same with computer games, at least in John's eyes, they're completely uninteresting. The same goes for literary works, which are mostly based on traditional culture. John has already caught up on interesting movies during the year since he transmigrated. He truly has nothing to do. Nen is different from physical strength, you can't see any changes from daily strength training, but you can directly feel the growth of Nen. This is a completely new feeling that he couldn't experience in his previous life. He can feel the increase in Nen every day, although it's not very obvious, it's definitely increasing. Every day, he first practices techniques, such as using Nen to project outwards and transform it into various shapes. These moves are useless for increasing Nen, but they strengthen John's control over it. In the original work, Bisky instantly transformed Nen into various numbers. It takes John 5 seconds to condense Nen into clear numbers. As for the hand-running skills that Jing demonstrated, John never even considered them. John's Nen talent is very good. Although he can't compare to Killua and Gon, the 2 chosen ones, John's cultivation of Nen has also progressed greatly due to the complementary nature of Ripple. However, because he doesn't have a sparring partner, his reaction speed for Ryu and Ken is still insufficient, but John can't worry about that for the time being. Recently, he doesn't know where he made enemies, and there's a warrant for John's arrest online. But now that John has changed his face, he's not particularly afraid. This identity was arranged by Badabai, so even if someone suspects John's current identity, they basically won't continue investigating once they trace it back to Badabai. Of course, Badabai also tried to recruit John before. Although the Phantom Troop isn't strong in his eyes, he also understands that being able to injure Phaeton like that requires a certain amount of strength, plus John is still young. Although the conditions were tempting, John refused. Terrorist hunter or something, although the salary is high and John's abilities are very suitable, it's too troublesome. Opening a shop and making money with Pearl Jam, and then slowly surviving until he becomes invincible, is John's initial life plan. Of course, it's just John's self-comforting words. Getting along with teammates will create unnecessary bonds. If a teammate dies, he will also be very sad. This is human nature, and most people have this kind of compassion. John has always been very careful when interacting with people in this world, afraid of causing bad emotions because of their deaths. Afraid that one day he will forget his previous life, afraid of being assimilated by this world. In fact, John is not very good at being a coward. Seeing the famous Phantom Troop, he didn't run away directly, but killed a few of them instead. Being a coward is for people stronger than himself. John is actually super reckless against those weaker than himself. Anyway, he can't die, so he's just recklessly living his life. John himself is very safe. Right now, no one should be able to kill him in the mirror world, except for those curse-type abilities. But John's own strength is just so, enough to protect himself but not enough to save others. When he has the ability, John feels compassion for ordinary people in danger, which is very dangerous for John, who has limited strength. John is afraid that one day he will be moved by some irrelevant people and sacrifice his life. Although John is not a saint, nor does he have the ambition to save the world, he wouldn't just stand by and watch someone die. If John already had Gold Experience Requiem or The World Over Heaven, John wouldn't mind guest starring as a superhero, but it's too early now. So John turns a blind eye. John cowardly avoids it. Avoiding it is shameful, but it's useful. John is just an ordinary person who transmigrated. As expected, I don't have the resolve of either the Golden Spirit or the Pitch Black Will, John murmured softly. The most suitable one is Diavolo. Bosses are all treacherous, but Diavolo looks too strange, with a moldy octopus head and a black lace underwear, he's simply an Italian weirdo. He looks like a pervert doing performance art, which would make the shop's business even worse. Dio's face is not bad, handsome with a bit of evil charm. He looks like the type girls like. As expected, even villains must have high looks, otherwise how can they deceive their subordinates into selling their lives for you? There are still people who miss and follow Dio, Father Pucci, many years after his death. Dio's face is impeccable, and his personal charm is also the best in the Jojo world. Only Jonathan Joestar has the gentlemanly charm to match him. The other Jojos have some deviations in their understanding of the Golden Spirit, and their personal charm is not as good as Dio's as a villain. Although John only has Dio's appearance and not Dio's inhuman spirit. But at least it's not embarrassing to show it off. John really doesn't dare to imitate the people in Vento Oreo, the revealing outfit is too embarrassing. John has also been working hard to improve his cooking skills these days, and there have been some improvements. After all, he can't just rely on the special abilities of Pearl Jam, he has to use his own strength a little. And John also has a signature dish, yes, it's one of the results of John's lottery draw before. Morioa's signature dish, stewed beef tongues production process. Thanks to the system's cards, John has basically mastered the production of this dish, and the taste is still acceptable. John always wonders why other transmigrators come to another world and conquer the stomachs of people in another world with traditional Chinese cuisine. Why doesn't he have this skill? He has to rely on the system to teach him how to cook. It's already afternoon. John took off his clothes and trained with all his might until his nen was exhausted. Of course, he had to constantly maintain Ripple to recharge his nen. Is anyone here? A tall woman pushed the door open. John was practicing moves naked. Seeing the girl's face suddenly turn red, John realized the problem. It's not what you think, let me explain, believe me. Sorry, I'm disturbing you. The girl ran away in embarrassment. You definitely misunderstood. John chased after her to protect his reputation. Chapter 116. After some explaining, John finally persuaded the girl to return to the shop. John carried the girl, whose back neck was swollen and unconscious, and placed her on a chair. The girl was clearly not listening to John's explanation. For the sake of APATT House's future business, he couldn't let this girl run away. If others knew he was a pervert, he wouldn't even be able to sell his first item. John decided to let her eat an unparalleled delicacy made with pearl jam. After she understood the wonders of the food, he would make her pay for this meal. He couldn't let her set a precedent. As for other repayment methods that everyone would love to see, John was only 13 years old and didn't have that ability yet. But this girl didn't seem like she had the ability to repay either, and John was in a dilemma. John tied her up tightly with hemp rope. John hadn't learned how to tie people up. It was said that most laymen who tied people up could easily break free. But John had learned about a more professional tying method in his previous life. That's right, it was the turtle bondage that had appeared countless times in doujinshi. Fortunately, it was just hemp rope. If it were a leather whip, he would never be able to clear his name in this life, and he would have to change his account immediately. John had no idea what this girl liked to eat. The best thing John made now was braised beef tongue, but considering that many people didn't eat beef tongue, John had to make a tomato scrambled eggs and a seaweed soup. Few people should be allergic to these dishes, and the most important thing was that they were simple to make, even a culinary newbie like John could make them successfully. The taste was also passable, at least not unpalatable. With the pearl jam to enhance the flavor, it was at least at the level of an ordinary restaurant's head chef. Two strangely shaped small tomatoes, suspended in the air, were in front of John. Treatment target setting complete. Select symptoms: dark circles, bruising on the back of the neck. John's arm stiffened. He didn't expect that he still hadn't controlled his strength well, but this was normal. After all, she had been knocked unconscious, so there must be some bruises. 2 scoops of pearl jam immediately flew into these 2 dishes, completely melting into them. The dishes were not important, what was important was the pearl jam melted in them. Put the seaweed in the soup bowl, add hot water, and finally put on the lid, and wait for a while and it will be okay. Tomato scrambled eggs were also something he learned from his mother in his previous life to prove that he was a person who could cook. Of course, he only learned this one dish. The 2 dishes took John a total of 5 minutes, so much so that the girl hadn't woken up when John brought the dishes out. How should he wake up this girl who was knocked unconscious by him? John was in trouble. John had never learned how to wake up an unconscious person before. John recalled that in his previous life, he had seen evil enemies pouring a bucket of cold water on his unconscious heroes in TV dramas in order to torture them. But John felt that it was a bit inappropriate, because the girl's clothes were white, and if he splashed water on her, it would directly become transparent and become an 18+ scene. John adjusted his breathing and prepared to put his hands on the girl's back neck to release a ripple. But in the instant before John's hand touched the girl's back neck, the girl woke up. The girl suddenly closed her eyes tightly, her face flushed, and she made inexplicable humming sounds in her mouth. John didn't know that the girl was already awake, she was just acting. She seemed to feel discomfort in her lower body, and looked down to see that she was tied up in a shameful posture. Even the girl from another world realized the profound meaning of turtle bondage. In fact, what John didn't know was that the girl had already woken up, but she was locked in a private room with super good sound insulation, and she had no way to call for help from the outside world with her voice. She could only keep wriggling, trying to break the rope, but this rope was hemp rope, a huge one. And the most terrible thing was that the more she moved, the tighter the rope became. This was the art of turtle bondage. This made the girl even more convinced that the shopkeeper named Dio was a pervert. She now regretted coming here alone to see handsome guys. She had heard her classmates say that a new shop had opened here, and the food in the shop was very expensive, which looked like a scam. But the shopkeeper was unexpectedly a bit handsome, and still had a special and charming temperament. Anyone who could open a shop here had some money. The girls immediately made up a brainless jacksuit TV series about a rich young master personally opening a shop and cooking in order to complete a family task. Who knew that she would suddenly run into John, who was really practicing? She, an ordinary person, couldn't see the energy surrounding John, and didn't know what John was doing. But bumping into a boy with his body bare, as a normal girl, she would be shy, so she ran away shyly. But things were beyond her expectations. She was knocked unconscious and detained by John. She couldn't help but think of those confinement and training doujinshi under her bed. Although she wasn't completely a fujoshi, she had such friends, and she had learned about these things more or less. She didn't expect John to be a pervert despite his handsome appearance. What would he do? Thinking of this, her face couldn't help but flush. John had no idea that this seemingly pure girl had awakened strange attributes. What do you want to do? I will never be servile to you, I will definitely resist to the end. The girl said with a flushed face. John always felt that she had misunderstood something, but was it so difficult to force her to eat food? I don't know what you are talking about, but be sure to eat my dishes. John ignored whether she agreed or not and directly brought the dishes to the girl's face, preparing to feed her. The girl was very desperate. She didn't expect that he still wanted to play new tricks and force herself to reveal her ugly state by using drugs. John seemed to have thought of something again. In order to prevent her from defaulting on the bill, John turned on the video recording mode of his phone to record the moment she ate the food. Because of the special therapeutic effect of pearl jam, she would definitely make a fool of herself the first time she ate it. This video would be a perfect black history without any processing. Taking her black history should be able to force her to promote him more. John couldn't help but give a thumbs up to his idea. The girl was surprised. She didn't expect John to like this kind of play, wanting to use the video of me showing my ugly state to threaten me and make me your hot weapon? The girl felt a sense of despair. John put a spoonful of seaweed soup into the girl's mouth. The girl was very resistant, but John still forcibly put the spoon into the girl's mouth. So delicious. Chapter 117. So delicious. Hearing this, John breathed a sigh of relief. It seemed that celestial cuisine was still more to the taste of the people of this world. Unexpectedly, this guy has some cooking skills, the girl acknowledged John's cooking. But the next moment, the girl recalled her situation again. She was not here to eat, but was kidnapped. A surge of heat flowed from her lower abdomen to the back of her neck, and this heat also had a tingling sensation like an electric current. Damn it, I just ate too happily and forgot that this pervert put medicine in the dish. It seems that I'm going to be penetrated again. But this tingling sensation made people feel very comfortable, and the whole person felt refreshed. A feeling of pleasure and comfort occupied the girl's heart, making her unable to help but hum. The bruise on the back of the girl's head disappeared in just a few seconds. It seems that the effect of this dish is to treat blood stasis, then the next dish will be to remove dark circles. John is the first time to see others eating pearl jam to treat their body. John did not hesitate and immediately stuffed the next spoonful of food into the girl's mouth, and the girl gave up resisting. A different kind of delicacy once again swept the girl's tongue, hitting the girl's brain nerves directly. The girl's face did not turn the red that is common in. It's a pity that it's not a world of aphrodisiac cuisine, otherwise you could definitely see the girl showing in a hog face. The heat gathered to the girl's eyes, and she couldn't even open her eyes all of a sudden. She originally wanted to rub her eyes with her hands, but because John had tied her up, she couldn't move her hands, so she had to wriggle frantically. The whole process lasted only about 10 seconds, and then there were no other abnormalities, and the girl also stopped panting. Now John's image in her heart has changed again. Even if she doesn't have any common sense, she knows that this is definitely not an aphrodisiac. But this is definitely not normal food either. That man definitely put medicine in the food, but I don't know what kind of medicine it is. How could normal food have this kind of effect? I almost had an orgasm directly. The girl looked at the food on the table with lingering fear. Only a little of the food was touched, and the aroma still impacted the girl's nasal cavity as always. She didn't have lunch at noon, and because of John, she didn't have time to eat anything. Now her stomach is empty and thirsty for food. The girl recalled the delicacy that John had forced her to eat and couldn't help but swallow. With a gurgling sound, the girl's unpromising stomach growled because of her fantasy of food in her mind. There was no way to control it. If the girl hadn't been tied up, she would have wanted to crawl into the ground. In fact, the dishes that John made were not that delicious. The main reason was that the girl was already hungry, and it was also the first time she tasted the celestial cuisine of another world, which gave her a sense of freshness, coupled with the legendary seasoning ability of pearl jam. This caused such a big reaction from the girl. John's face darkened. Sure enough, my feeling that this crazy woman was sensible was just an illusion. The girl also realized that she had misspoke and quickly shut up. Listen to me, I'm not a different person, I'm the kind of superpowered person you usually think of. The girl nodded seriously, but no matter how you looked at it, it seemed like she was perfunctorily answering John. Unexpectedly, this young man with good cooking skills and handsome looks is actually a crazy Chiyunibu. This can explain why he kidnapped me. The girl looked at John with more pity. As for believing that John has superpowers, what a joke. She had already graduated from Chiyunibu a long time ago. Those special feelings just now should also be the effect of the medicine. How could these things deceive her wise self? Although she felt that she was thinking something rude, John continued to explain. We can cultivate a kind of energy called Nen, and we can use this energy to do many things. Everyone's Nen abilities are different, but the training methods are still universal. Like taking off your clothes. The girl carefully interjected. John rolled his eyes at her and continued to explain, of course not, there's no such nonsense way to become stronger. I'm taking off my clothes to release Nen. Wearing clothes will stick to a lot of sweat, which is too troublesome. John then explained several basic Nen techniques to her in detail, and then gave a few examples. The girl's eyes gradually changed from the perfunctory disbelief at the beginning to surprise and admiration. How amazing, how did he come up with such a handsome and complete setting? She had already developed some admiration for John. It seems that it must have taken him a lot of effort. It can even be used as the main setting of a manga, and he also listed famous people such as the world's famous bounty criminals and the hunter chairman. John looked at the surprised girl with satisfaction. It must be very surprising to come into contact with the extraordinary world for the first time. John believed that he had opened the door to a new world for the girl, and the girl's worldview must have experienced an apocalyptic collapse. John understood the girl very well. Wasn't he like this when he first transmigrated? No one has ever told John to keep Nen abilities a secret. In fact, this is not a particularly secret matter. You must know that most Nen users in the world are not hunters, but they have other channels to learn Nen abilities. This shows that Nen abilities are not particularly secretive either. John immediately used Silver Chariot to cut the rope that bound the girl with a single sword. He made it seem effortless. If he wanted to increase persuasiveness, practical actions were indeed better. The two lips were like a fresh fish that had just been caught, opening and closing, with dull eyes. What did she just see? How did the rope suddenly break? How did he do it? She had many doubts in her heart. Could it be that there really are superpowers in the world? The girl had forgotten about the delicacy and her eyes gradually became sharp. This girl is so surprised and surprised, John shook his head, it seems that this girl is not a very smart Yako. Chapter 118. The moment John took out the mirror, the girl's worldview collapsed. The dark circles under her eyes, caused by staying up late for long periods, had disappeared. As a girl, she knew that dark circles were very difficult to get rid of. To make them unnoticeable, she had to rely on makeup skills. But John had completely eliminated her dark circles in the time it took to eat a meal. She clearly knew that there were no drugs of this level at the moment. Could it be that what this seemingly perverted store manager said was true? Could it be that those celebrities she often saw on TV were all superpowered beings? The girl's worldview was reshaped. In fact, the world of Nen abilities has a tacit confidentiality agreement to prevent the leakage of Nen abilities, but not many people abide by it. Nen ability is not the patent of the Hunter Association. Theoretically, ordinary people can slowly train Nen ability through meditation as long as they have enough willpower. Moreover, the cultivation of Nen ability has many overlaps with more martial arts schools. Some martial artists, Zen masters, and artists will inadvertently cultivate Nen ability. Even the former world's strongest, the known peak of human enhancement type Hunter Association chairman Netero, cultivated the Bodhisattva of 100 types through Zen and martial arts. However, only a small number of capable people can cultivate Nen ability through these methods. However, the Hunter exam can also be regarded as a screening of abilities. How could ordinary people without any talent pass the difficult Hunter exam? However, John didn't have so many concerns, mainly because he didn't know about this at all, and no one had ever mentioned it to him. Moreover, John is not a preacher. He is not proficient in his own Nen ability, so how could he rashly teach others? As for Lindsay last time, it was because he had already agreed and couldn't back down. In fact, most Nen ability masters can see a person's approximate aptitude. There are very few hotheads like John who directly teach others. John had just gotten rid of Lindsay, so why would he ask for trouble? He only told the girl the truth of this world. As for the power to reach the truth, sorry, he and the girl weren't that familiar yet. Lindsay's awakening was already a stroke of luck. In most cases, people would die. John didn't want to harm this girl he only met once. So, everything you just said is true? That hunter chairman who often appears on TV, that white-bearded old man, is also a superpowered being. No, to be precise, he is an unuser, but it's not much different if you say superpower. That old man can no longer be described as an ordinary person. That is the great power of one person against a country. The girl fell into a daze. She just wanted to see the handsome store manager of this newly opened restaurant. Why did this happen? Suddenly, she was told that the world she had lived in for more than 10 years had superhumans. At the same time, a sense of crisis arose. There were such terrifying people around us. They possessed superpowers far beyond ordinary people. They could kill themselves without any effort. Then, she recalled the beautiful fantasies of her previous Chayunabita period. This world has superpowers, so can I learn them? In other words, can I also become a magical girl? The girl's eyes changed as she looked at John because of her daydreaming. Hey, what's with the little stars flashing in your eyes? Let me make it clear first, I won't teach you, or anything about superpowers. As for abusing superpowers or something, you don't have to worry about it as an ordinary person. Generally, there will be specialists to deal with this kind of situation. Most NAN users are not immune to the damage of guns. Swords and the like can also cause damage to them, although it is generally difficult for ordinary people to defeat NAN users. Most NAN users are just enhanced versions of ordinary people. Only by practicing NAN ability to a certain level can they be immune to bullets, but there are not many such people. Of course, there are quite a few such people, John silently added in his heart. Then how is your combat power in the superpower world? The girl asked curiously. Don't look at me as young, my strength is still okay. There shouldn't be many people who can kill me. John was quite proud of this. Although his NAN ability was not very good, with the addition of his stand, no one could steadily kill John. The girl was a little skeptical, after all, John was too young, a little shorter than her. After all, John is only 13 years old now and is using the appearance of Dio as a young boy who just arrived at the Joestar family. His height is only 1.65 meters, KNM cannot change a person's height. He is taller than his peers, but he has not yet begun to develop completely and cannot compare to the girl who looks like a college student. That is indeed a problem, John fell into deep thought. Why don't I work in your store as a waiter to pay off my debt? The girl suddenly suggested. Sorry, I don't have any customers here, so I don't need a waiter for the time being. Think about it, your superpowers are so practical, they will definitely be popular in the future. You should have some confidence too. Aren't you tired of being a store manager, chef, and waiter every day? John thought that it was true that he came to enjoy himself and make money, not to suffer. What you said does make sense, but I always feel like you are trying to trick me. You are so shrewd, who can deceive you? John thought that it was true. Waiter Miriman reporting for duty? Ah, by the way, what's your name, store manager? Apache. John's face darkened. He didn't expect that the store name would still pit him. Listen carefully, my name is Dio Brando. The girl's heart revealed a smile of success. The first step to contact the extraordinary world has been achieved. Next, slowly extract the knowledge about superpowers that this little store manager knows. The girl was very excited. It could be said that this was the most shocking day she had experienced in her short life. Superpowers must be obtained. Chapter 119. Miriam had been working here for 2 full weeks without any gains. Or rather, it could be said the gains were enormous. Miriam learned many things about the world of NAN users, but she didn't know how to cultivate NAN. John stood generously where Miriam could see him, practicing without avoiding anything. At first, Miriam observed with rapt attention, but after a long time, she felt despair. Every day, she could only see the shopkeeper, Dio, diligently doing something by himself, muttering and mumbling, not knowing what he was doing. If she hadn't seen him use superpowers with her own eyes, she would really think he was crazy. Bored, Miriam opened a book she had just borrowed from the city library, a classic from this world. John only glanced at it and lost interest. He naturally saw Miriam observing his practice, but she neither knew NAN nor was a stand user, so she couldn't see John's NAN. Without guidance, all observation was futile. John didn't believe she could master NAN by watching him practice without knowing the principles. If she really could, John would eat the table in front of him on the spot. Nan isn't generated out of thin air. Cultivating Nan requires a strong physique, ample vitality, and then sufficient mental strength, which must then be guided to awaken it. John wasn't sure about mental strength and vitality, but Miriam's physical fitness was definitely not up to par. In these 2 weeks, besides Miriam, there were actually people coming here to be fleeced, to eat. However, most of them, actually only 2, were rich second generations with nothing better to do, who came here after hearing urban legends, and such an expensive price matched their status. Then they cried in the private room. If Miriam hadn't thoughtfully provided a pack of tissues, their clothes would have been soaked and they wouldn't have been able to leave. John was still conscientious here, and in order to protect the privacy of his guests, he specially separated several private rooms in the store, because the healing effect of Pearl Jam was too shocking. It was built on the principle of not embarrassing customers, and most importantly, to prevent the healing effect from scaring away new customers. However, from then on, they also knew John's extraordinary ability, and they also promised John to help promote it. John had videos of them crying, using this as a threat. Urban legends are also spreading widely, and many people have heard of the restaurant on this street. Of course, this was Miriam's suggestion, as John's understanding and culture were still different from the natives here. However, this trick did have miraculous effects, giving John his first batch of customers. Next, he just had to wait quietly for things to ferment, and the store's reputation would naturally spread. It's worth mentioning that the original store name APAT Tea House was rejected by Miriam, because John didn't have tea at all, it was a restaurant. Hey? Is it a takeaway? Miriam put down the book in her hand and looked at the door. That's right, as a chef who runs a restaurant, John blatantly ordered takeaway from a nearby restaurant in the store. The main reason was that he was too lazy to cook, which made Miriam very speechless. Miriam got up to get John and her lunch, but found that it wasn't the takeaway delivery guy she thought it was. Several men with colorful dyed hair and ripped jeans walked in, 3 in total. The leader was a green-haired man in his 30s with an average appearance. Behind him were 2 yellow-haired young men in their 20s who looked like social punks. One of the yellow-haired men kicked the door, walking into the store with an extremely arrogant expression. This doesn't look like a takeaway delivery guy, right? Definitely a Yakuza, gangster. Miriam stopped in her tracks. After all, she was just an ordinary girl who had just entered university. In her first half of her life, she had seen gangsters, but this was the first time she had faced them directly. Unlike John, Miriam, who was born and raised in this city, knew very well how much influence the gangsters had on this city. Although she had faced the shopkeeper Dio, who was a superpower user, Dio had no malice towards her. The most important thing was that they looked very fierce, and they couldn't compare to Dio's handsome and charming face at all. Sure enough, this is still a society that values appearance. What if these 3 are just customers with special aesthetics? You can't condemn them all just because of their sham-made styling. Miriam persuaded herself, forcibly calmed her emotions, cheered up, suppressed the fear in her heart, and engaged in polite conversation as a waitress. 3 gentlemen, would you like something? I've put the menu on the table. None of the 3 people smiled, they were very serious. Bring all the dishes on the menu. The green-haired man didn't even look at the menu. Ah! Sir, you'd better look at the menu again before you say that. This sentence was not good, and it immediately angered the yellow-haired lackey next to him. He slapped the table with his big hand, making a bang. Why so much nonsense? I told you to serve the food, so serve the food. The yellow-haired lackey was also arrogant and looked like an idiot. Miriam gave them a meaningful look and didn't say anything more. Next, it had nothing to do with her. Gangsters should be left to the superpower user Dio, the shopkeeper. The door wasn't locked. Miriam knocked on the door of a private room. John was sticking to the wall, not moving. No, the sharp-eyed Miriam noticed that John's feet had left the ground, and John's body was only supported by a finger against the wall. John was practicing ripple. John concentrated all his ripple on one finger, using the stickiness of the ripple qigong to stick to the wall to achieve the purpose of levitation. This tests the ripple user's endurance and willpower. John was now covered in sweat, but the amazing thing was that his breathing rhythm was not disturbed at all, but was very regular. Shopkeeper, a few gangsters have come outside and named to order all the dishes on the menu. John put down his arm, and the whole person immediately fell to the ground, making Miriam stunned. Oh, I know. John turned around and walked directly to the kitchen. This private room was the one closest to the kitchen. Pearl Jam's ability can be used after the dishes are completed. He didn't go out now mainly because this face was too young, and it was difficult to believe that such a young chef had reached the price point. The price of John's restaurant's food is comparable to that of top chefs. John didn't think much about it. After all, the gangster boss was still super rich. The gangster forces in this world are very large, and even V5 is affected by them. It's like a gangster alliance can influence the United Nations meeting in his previous life. It's ridiculous. People of their level can still afford to eat John's dishes. After all, Pearl Jam's magical ability is here, and it's worth the price. Of course, John will also go all out. Leaving behind a bewildered Miriam, who thought they were going to fight, but didn't expect the shopkeeper to still be cowardly. Miriam thought that John was afraid of the gangsters and honestly went to cook, which also made Miriam, who was worried, breathe a sigh of relief. After all, it's better to have one thing less than one thing more. Chapter 120. John quickly prepared the dishes. After all, the meager one-page menu didn't have many options. The dishes themselves weren't important, even if it was a pile of dung, it wouldn't matter, as they were merely carriers for the Pearl Jam. Of course, they couldn't actually use dung, because the Pearl Jam also possessed consciousness, and they wouldn't integrate themselves with excrement. Moreover, John's bewitching bistro didn't primarily focus on John's culinary skills, even a master chef from his previous life wouldn't fare well here. John's advantage was the magical healing effect of the Pearl Jam. These mafia bosses weren't short on cash. Just the thought of fleecing a few long-term big spenders, underworld kings who secretly controlled an area and would specially request reservations to eat his dishes for the sake of longevity, made John unable to suppress a simple, unadorned, and monotonous smile. John finally arrived at the door of the room where the guests were. He adjusted his breathing, slightly tidied up the wrinkles on his clothes caused by exercise, smoothed out his messy, bird's nest-like hair, and once again resumed his Dio-esque charming demeanor. "Excuse me." Milliman opened the door. Although John could only cook a limited number of dishes, there were still a dozen or so, and she couldn't carry them all by herself. Besides, Milliman was originally a waitress, meant for serving tea and water. However, John had to come as well, because the dishes hadn't been infused with Pearl Jam yet, and they didn't possess any superpowers. John's dishes without Pearl Jam tasted very ordinary, possibly even worse than cafeteria food. "Guests, the dishes are here." Milliman placed the dishes on the table, then said softly and politely. John followed Milliman into the small private room. What came into view were three small hoodlums who clearly weren't good people. John's originally monotonous smile froze. What are these things? Where are the mafia big hots? Where are the ferocious-looking big spenders? The veins on John's forehead bulged. Now he understood what was happening. The gangsters Milliman mentioned were just these few small-time thugs. He had thought they were mafia bosses. But John wasn't ready to give up. "Milliman, what exactly is going on? Where are those suit-wearing mafia uncles?" "There's no such thing. Aren't these the gangsters I was talking about? Also, you should have a more respectful attitude towards gangsters," Milliman whispered, reminding John of some basic things to keep in mind when dealing with gangsters. Seeing that John hadn't put down the dishes and was chatting happily with Milliman, completely disregarding them, how could they tolerate it? The blonde-haired underling number 1 immediately slammed the table, and the blonde-haired underling number 2 immediately spoke out to reprimand him. "What's going on with your restaurant? Are you looking down on our brother Wei?" The green-haired man coughed softly and glanced at the underling next to him as a reminder. The underling immediately understood. "Hurry up and put down the food. Do you really not know the rules here, or are you pretending not to know? This whole area belongs to our Philip family. If you want to open a shop, you have to pay your dues." Seeing that John was stunned and completely unaware of what was happening, he realized that John probably really didn't know. The green-haired man, as the leader, patted the arms of the two underlings. "Don't make things difficult for this little brother. It seems he really doesn't know the rules of this area. We are operatives of the Philip family, here to collect taxes. At the same time, we will provide you with protection. Once you pay the money, we will protect you from harm from other gangs. Why should I pay protection fees to gangsters?" John still understood that these gangsters were here to ask for money, but this was the first time John had encountered someone collecting protection fees. "My shop doesn't need protection. Can I not pay?" The green-haired man's face stiffened slightly. He didn't expect John to be so uncooperative. Boss, you can't do that. It's the rule here that every shop pays. We can't make an exception for you. Do I really have to pay? Yes, you have to pay. I understand. John sighed. At this moment, the green-haired man, hearing John's sensible words, nodded. He took out a pack of cigars from his pocket, then took out a half-smoked one and put it in his mouth. The blonde-haired underling immediately eagerly lit the cigarette for him. But seeing that John didn't make a move, Milliman couldn't stand it anymore and nudged John with her elbow. John immediately understood and spoke up, "Is the protection fee included in the meal cost? Or do you pay for your meal separately?" The green-haired man gave John a meaningful look. When he went to other shops before, they treated him like an ancestor, and the shops voluntarily provided everything he ate and used. He didn't expect this young shop owner to be so clueless. Milliman panicked and quietly hid behind John, whispering to him, "Boss, they mean you're treating them to this meal." John didn't shy away from shouting loudly, "What do you mean? You mean they want to eat a free meal?" Everyone's eyes turned to Milliman, and Milliman took a step back awkwardly. "Don't be so shameless. We're already giving you a lot of face by eating your food here." The blonde-haired underling was also furious. Even the green-haired man's face was very unsightly. It was rare to see someone so clueless. "Then there's nothing to talk about. Quickly pay the bill, or you'll regret it." John slammed the bill on the table. The green-haired man grabbed the bill and immediately exclaimed in shock. He hadn't actually looked at the numbers clearly. But looking at the densely packed zeros, he realized something was wrong. "Are you running a black shop and ripping people off? 62 million Jenny, even gold is cheaper than this. Are you trying to rob a bank? From the sound of your tone, you don't want to pay, and you want to play me." John's eyes gradually became dangerous, especially with Dio's face, making him even more intimidating. But because of John's age and height, his intimidation was destined to be limited. "Milliman, you go out first. Don't come in without my permission. They have an entire gang behind them. Even if you beat them, it's useless. The gang behind them has guns. Don't worry, I know what I'm doing." John reassured Milliman and pushed her out the door. John immediately noticed Milliman's little thoughts. She would definitely be hiding behind the door. "I just wanted to call an ambulance in case someone got hurt," Milliman made up a reason to cover up her panic. Milliman wanted to see how strong John's superpowers really were. "Don't worry, I'll be careful." Then John locked the door. Milliman put her ear to the door, and the sound of fists hitting flesh came from the room, along with endless screams.